Rolleston and I'm the Chair of NHS Devon. So I'd just like to start, if I may, by giving some apologies for absence. We've had apologies from Donna Manson, from Kate Shields and from Councillor James McInnes. We have a number of members who are going to be joining us remotely, a couple of whom have given notice to me that they'll be slightly late, Liz Davenport and Sheena Asthana. Could I ask you, please, Philippa, to confirm that we're quorate?
Yes, we are, Chair.
Thank you very much. I'd also like to especially welcome Mark Cook, who's the Managing Director of NHS England South West, who thank you for joining us in person. You're very welcome. And we are also expecting later on for Molly Marcoux, who's the Company Secretary from Cornwall and Isles of Scilly, to join us, but I think she's going to be slightly late. And also welcome to Rhiannon Edwards, who's joining us as a member of the public in person. Thank you very much. I'd also just like to make a special note of thanks to Ruth Harrell, because Ruth, this is your last meeting with us, and thank you very much for everything that you've contributed as a partner member for mental health. Really appreciate that. And I know that the process is underway for us to have another partner member, which is a rotating post. So thank you very much for everything that you've done. So can I ask if anyone has any updates to the declarations of interest? No? Thank you very much. And also, can I ask for your approval of the minutes of the meeting that we held on the 26th of March in public? Just want to also make a quick note that we're going to be meeting in private following this meeting, and that is just a meeting about our operational plan, and the reason it's going to be a short private meeting is that we're going to be bringing it back to a public session of the board, and it's incomplete at this time, so but it will be coming back to a public meeting in the future. So I'm just going to come on next to our to my chair's report, but because I'm intending to take that as read, but I want to take the opportunity to pay special thanks to Nigel Aitchison, our Chief Medical Officer, because this is your last public board meeting. And I just wanted to say on a personal note and on behalf of the board how much we've all appreciated the expertise and experience and professionalism that you've brought to this role. You're going to be very sorely missed. And not just for those things, but for the warmth and approachability that you've gone about your role. So thank you very much indeed from all of us, and wish you well in what comes next. So thank you. Right. So does anyone have any comments on the Chair's report? Because if not, I'm going to pass over for the Chief Executive's report to Steve Moore. Steve, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. And I'll say a few words about Nigel as well in a moment, so to save his blushes right now. I'll take the report as read, but there were a few things I just wanted to highlight or emphasise from it. You'll see there's an update there on the organisational change programme that we're very much in the midst of at the moment. Firstly, to thank Piers and the HR team for getting us to the point where we were able to send out the consultation on the 21st of May as we promised. I think that was an important moment for the organisation, having been through a number of delays and quite a long process that far. So a really helpful start to that. When I met with staff just before the launch rather, I emphasised in that this is genuinely a consultation, that in designing an organisation, particularly with the level of challenge we had around the headcount reduction and cost reduction that we were facing, it is unlikely we've got everything right. So genuinely hearing from staff about where that might be wrong is something that I've committed that we will be open-minded and really want to see their views on that. We have had, alongside that, as the Chair's already reflected, we're having some changes to the executive team as well. So firstly, just to recognise that Andrew Millwood has made a decision to resign and retire. And I'm hugely grateful to Philippa for stepping in as the interim whilst we consider what our next steps will be in that regard. And if I can just say a few words about Nigel. Nigel and I have only had the opportunity to work together for probably slightly less than 4 months, but I have to say in that time I have hugely welcomed your wisdom, your insight. As the Chair said, your kindness and in how you approach things. And I know I'm going to really miss you. If I could have talked you out of it, I would have. But wish you all the best for the future. I hope this isn't the last that the NHS has seen of you. I'm pretty sure it won't be. But you should lead this organisation very proud of what you've achieved whilst you've been here. So on behalf of me and the board, thank you for all of that. And then finally, in senior team context, we have now, the board will see, made some progress with our phase 1 recruitments that were outstanding, and there's further activity going on in that regard. But just to recognise that Hannah Pugliese has been appointed into Penny's team. I think a really important appointment, and Hannah's, I know, is quite excited, if a little daunted by the scale of the challenge that she faces, but it is really good to see that making progress now. I've also got in my report, but I'll say more about this when we come to it on the agenda, an update on the annual plan. Just a couple of things to say on that. We're still, I think, awaiting formal confirmation that we remain in NOV4 and that we have, and what our revised exit criteria will be for that. It is obviously, it is a disappointment to the organisation and to the system that we weren't able to exit at the time that we hoped. But many things have happened, and there have been some good positive things that have happened in that time. We've had two formal meetings now with the national team over the last couple of weeks since the last time this board met. I think what I was able to describe there alongside my CEO and exec colleagues was a sense of a real fresh impetus to deal with some of those really difficult challenges that we face, that we've got the clearest plan, that people are telling me it's the clearest plan we've ever had, and we're clear about the underpinning schemes that will help us to deliver that. Although I would say no plan is ever complete, and there will be a continuous process of pushing that forward. We've also, as you'll see in the papers later, revised our governance arrangements, which is about focusing on improvement on the ground and ensuring that we can improve the experience that our patients are suffering every day. We know we have too many people waiting in ambulances and in our departments and waiting to get out of hospital. And in all of that, a real sense of a desire for genuine system leadership, for the system to work as a system. And I've seen that in evidence with my colleagues across our provider organisations. Of course, in all of that, the board will appreciate there are significant risks. The scale of our ambition is quite high, and we need to ensure that we build the confidence that we can deliver and do what we say we're going to do while we go through that plan. But a huge amount of work's gone into that, and as I say, I'll pick up that in more detail when we come to that part of the agenda. But I'm very happy to take any questions on my paper book, Chair.
Do we have any questions for Nigel here or outside the room? Not for Nigel, sorry. Steve? Oh dear.
Give them to Nigel, it'll be fine.
I'm so sorry. Right, so in that case we will move on to the next section, which is on our National Oversight Framework Segment 4 exit. And I think Bill and Anthony were going to lead on this item, so thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's a bit of a double act between me and the Chief Delivery Officer. So I think the report is self-evident. Chief Executive's already referred to NOV4 exit, and so to a large extent this is quite historical. And as we now expect, exit from NOV4 will not take place at the end of Q1 of 24-25, which would have been the end of next month. You can see in the report where we are currently measured and where we're assessed against each of the exit criteria. That continues to be a challenge for the system and for the organisations within the system. And despite the fact that there has been some improvement, so we've seen improvement as we got to the end of the last financial year in our UEC performance, and that has actually continued into this year, with many of the organisations actually being above their trajectory, which is the first time that we've seen that for some considerable time. There is a long way for us to go. And the financial challenge, which we'll talk about later in this meeting for this year, remains considerable. And the savings programme, as a consequence of that we have to deliver as a system and each of the individual organisations have to deliver, continues to present significant challenges. You can see in the report that there are some areas where we've shown some improvement and some areas that are also ranked as amber in terms of leadership and strategy, and also in terms of some of the elements, one of the elements of the financial plan, and also one of the elements in terms of system performance improvement. But the key things for us to be able to demonstrate in this financial year are continued progress on UEC in terms of the recovery that we have forecast in that area, to see the planned care improvements that we have witnessed in 23-24 continue in this year, and there are plans in place to ensure that those areas where we still have long waiters will be resolved in our plan resubmission, which we'll make to NHS England next month, and also to be in a position, as Chief Executive said, with redoubled efforts to deliver the financial position in this year. As I've said, that will be a challenge, but we have a very comprehensive and detailed plan to ensure that we can deliver against that. I'll hand over to Chief Delivery Officer to provide more detail on planned and urgent and emergency care.
Thank you very much. As Bill said, take the report as read. There are two things that I would like to highlight though, and that's around the key actions, both in terms of urgent care and also elective care, so pages 39 and 41 of the pack. Certainly the key actions around UEC, and I think Steve spoke to this at the beginning in his paper, was around the commitment to system working, and we've certainly seen a renewed enthusiasm and commitment to that. There are some key actions though coming out of UEC. The first is around looking at what those alternatives to ED could look like, and some very key work streams coming out of that. In fact, 7 key work streams coming out of that. Completion of the out-of-hospital review and its recommendations, which is a piece of work looking at how we are both commissioning out-of-hospital services, but also how they're being delivered. And I think I've spoken before about some of the differences that we have across the county, but fully understanding what those look like across all of our services. That work is almost complete, and I'm sure we'll be coming back to board and subcommittees at a later date. The clinical model work that Anthony Helmsley has been leading on is very much gaining continued traction, and that is around standardisations of pathways, but also looking where we are not delivering national best practice. And I think, like lots of systems, we think we want to try and make everything specific for Devon, but actually sometimes that means we stray away from nationally accepted best practice. And certainly virtual wards and UCR would be examples of that. So Anthony has been leading a number of clinical reference groups with some really good clinical buy-in to look at what those pathways could look like, and also to put some standardisation in so that we don't have some areas of paucity of supply that we do have at the moment. And then the last bit around that is around our review of UEC investments. And as you know, we have invested significantly in urgent emergency care over the last few years, but actually being really critical as to whether that is making a difference, and actually whether there is an opportunity for reinvestment within all of those areas. That work is ongoing. We've finished the first stage of that, which was looking at what has been spent in the last 2 years, but actually we want to go back further and look at beyond 2 years to see the whole portfolio of what has been spent, where it's been spent, and actually what we've got out of that and where the opportunities for reinvestment would be. So some very key actions that will come to conclusion over the next month. In terms of elective care then, certainly that has involved continued working with providers, looking at what the opportunities to improve the position, and I think I'll come on to a little bit of that later when we go into the integrated performance plan, continuing our demand modelling for specialties, making sure that that productivity elements, which we've spoken about before, very much first and foremost within our elective care plans, and then making sure that actually our theatre productivity is being rolled out across all organisations, and making sure that there's a very clear improvement plan. So some key actions which, although in the report that says to be completed by January, certainly we've brought that forward.
Thank you very much, Anthony. I can see that Judy, are you wanting to come in? Yes, Judy Hargaden.
Thank you very much. And I think we're all sad that we've not managed to exit NOF4 as originally planned, but no one can doubt the amount of hard work that's going on. And I get a real sense from this year's plan compared to previous ones that there's much more energy and commitment across the system to making it work, so all credit. I wonder if I could just ask for clarity on a couple of things. One is, it's barely mentioned, but I would like assurance that we're looking at 111 and making sure, and I guess that fits in with the theme I raised last time. I think it's often the interface between different services and the bits of service that supply the interface that can either provide solutions or perhaps cause problems. I would really like to know what you're learning from the review of the first 2 years' worth of emergency care money. I think you said you're getting to the end of that. So if you can't give us some key thoughts today, maybe we can be sure that would come to the next meeting. Because learning lessons from those special monies that come in and how we make decisions on them is really good. And my last thought is, despite everything that we're doing, I highlighted this 789 65-week waiters, and I would just find it helpful to understand what the particular sticking points are in those. Is it the use of theatres, or is it such a complex set of scenarios that there are no 2 or 3 main reasons? Thank you.
I'll take those in order. So certainly in terms of 111, one of the things we've been looking at is around care coordination. Care coordination we set up at pace last year, you may remember, and there's a presentation at board a couple of months ago around some of the early successes within that. One of the things we have found, though, is that, like many initiatives in urgent emergency care, there's a tendency to layer and put on additional schemes without fully understanding what some of the underlying problems are. We've been looking at the cost benefit and also a very interim or sort of early stage business case for the continuation of that service. But one of the key things that's coming out is that interaction between 111 and also the interaction with SWAST. And that's what we're trying to unpick at the moment. Obviously, we have a contract in place with PPG at the moment, so there is a contract management piece. But for me, it's very much about the interaction and the coordination of those services using both SWAST as a key player in this, but also our 111 provider. And there's some very interesting national work that's been done on 111 services over the last couple of months, or been published over the last couple of months, which points towards some improvements that we could make locally in terms of how we're running those services or commissioning those services. So very much a central tenet of what we're doing as part of the out-of-hospital offer. And by that, by which we look to be reducing demand and attendance and conveyance as well. In terms of the monies element, well, it very much is work ongoing. There are some things that we put in place last year. Again, we put in for all the best reasons, but we haven't quite seen the delivery where we'd want them. Some of them around nursing home support, and part of that was around the IT infrastructure to support it, but also about the willingness to use some of those. And I think there's some very key lessons for us. Firstly, about fully understanding what the problem is we're trying to solve, rather than going for solutions all the time. And I think that's one of the big differences in terms of the planning processes for this year, is understanding what the problem is rather than implementing solutions because they seem like a good idea, or sometimes because we're told to implement well. So the monies element, full and complete report will be coming through, but we have highlighted some elements within that that we think could be reinvested better going forward. But we'll get the complete picture and then take that through the necessary committees for that element. In terms of the elective, well, I'm pleased to say actually things have progressed and moved on from the report that you've got in front of you. So actually there's about 400 patients that will come off that particular list. And the reason they will come off it, firstly, because we've been looking at what the further opportunities are for cross-provider work and sharing of waiting lists. We've also looked at some of the alternatives to surgical procedures. And then we've also looked at actually how we can manage those waits in a slightly different way, particularly for complex procedures. Obviously, we can't do everything in Devon, but actually where we are using out-of-Devon services, being very selective as to what that could look like. So that position will improve by about 400 patients. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. I think, Bill, you were indicating you might want to come in. That's all being covered, has it? Can I just press you further about the very long waiters, the 104-week waits, which is a huge impact for those individuals and impact on them then needing to be seen in primary care. It just seems that we're always so near but so far. We never quite get there. What assurance can you give us that we really will be able to make sure that we have nobody in our system waiting 104 weeks?
Of those weights that were highlighted in the paper, which I think were around 11, actually that has reduced significantly. And these are people that require very complex procedures with that's quite advanced prosthesis in many cases. We do all we can to make sure we minimise that. We have had some quite significant supply chain issues. I think we've resolved most of those now through some creativity, but also looking at other providers to assist us within that. So the position has increased. We man-mark these patients, so we're talking about them every single week to see exactly where they are, and also looking at what some of the alternatives could be. And although within all of those patients they were offered alternatives, they actually chose to stay within the Devon system. So choice is a big factor for us, and we have to make sure that we do comply with that. But we are man-marking each of these patients, and because the numbers are getting smaller, that becomes a much easier process.
Thank you for that. I'm going to go to outside the room to Alison Williams next. Alison.
Thank you, Chair. Just really to give a quick overview from the RSP perspective, if I may. So if you look at the summary on page 46 of the pack and the RAG rating, that is a self-rating that the system, all of the chief executives have agreed with. And I think it's understandable when you look at that, that there is a decision that the system will not be in a position to come out of NOF4 at the end of Q1 as originally planned. But I think what's important to do is to look behind the RAG rating, which is a bit of a blunt instrument really, and recognise the progress that has been made. There has been significant progress and a growing confidence around the elective performance. I think around the leadership, some of the changes and the demonstrable joint working across the organisations is also being recognised nationally. And I think it's probably fair to say, Steve and Bill, as you were both in the room, that, and certainly Bill would recognise this, the tone of the discussion in the RSP escalation meeting on the 20th of May reflected that growing maturity of leadership and joint leadership across the system. There is good progress being made with the strategic work, and that is genuinely about laying the foundations for the long term for the system, although that's a very long journey and one which will extend way beyond any NOF process and be the core business of the system moving forward. The sort of two real differences that I think need to be acknowledged and recognised as we move into the next phase of RSP is the integrity of planning, which both Steve and Anthony have referred to, and the detailed plans that sit behind particularly the UEC improvement agenda and the finance improvement agenda. And there was a session with Region last week to start to work through those. And significantly, the UHP plan is shaping up really well and a growing sense of confidence around that. There are some significant capital bids that are currently in the system with the national team that the RSP team are pressing on, because those would be key enablers to unlock some of the improved performance both at Torbay and in Plymouth. And again, that growing sense of confidence around delivery will hopefully be significant leverage to unlock that capital money for the system as well, which increasingly we're getting positive vibes back on. The reality is that the Quality Performance Committee of NHSE will review the position on the 4th of June. And at that point, a decision will be made about continuing in NOF4 and any revisions to the exit criteria. We've lobbied hard that the exit criteria themselves shouldn't change significantly because those are the reasons for going into NOF4 in the first place. But some of the measures that sit behind them need to be refined so that they're more clearly measurable and a fairer marking of the progress that the system is going to make. So hopefully by the next board meeting that will be able to be shared because it will be approved by NHSE. The final thing is, and it's a bit of a double-edged sword with NOF4. I think everybody who's in NOF4 wants to come out, quite rightly and understandably, but there is an advantage for remaining in, and that is the continued support that the system will have, both financially and in terms of people with expertise to help. And one of the further things that has been done, I think, which again is a growing confidence for this coming year, is there has been a detailed piece of work to map the support requirements to the actual actions within the improvement plans. It's a big ask from Devon into the national team, but that is imperative so that the system has the capacity and capability to help deliver some of these changes at pace. So I will continue to work with Steve and Chief Execs to make sure we get as much, if not all, of that resource that's needed to be able to help the system to be successful this year.
Thank you, Alison. That's hugely appreciated. I'm going to come next to Graham Clark.
Thank you very much indeed. Several points and questions, if I may, and I'll just run through them and then perhaps we can go back through them. So we've seen this report in its format for a while, and I'm sure all of us here don't want to get desensitised to its significance. And so I wondered whether there may be some merit in putting a summary up front that actually tells us what's changed since the last report. And in particular, I'm interested in the barriers that are preventing us moving forward. So, for example, I've raised the capital plan one before, Bill, you may recall. What stops us doing that? What are the things that are in the way? Because I think it would be quite helpful for us all to really be able to focus down upon the movement of things, and I acknowledge fully there has been movement, but also acknowledge there's some way to go. I did read through the SIAG report as well, and I can't help but compare and contrast between them. I recognise that there may be a timing difference between them, but they do state slightly different things about exit times and positions, etc. But I'm assuming that's just a matter of timing. But that said, in the SIAG report, there's a lot of Gantt charts, and when I look at the Gantt charts and really look at them carefully, they're not network plans, they are indeed space floating bars, and I'm not sure about the relationship between them, because an awful lot of the ones that are green, i.e. in progress, were due to end months and months ago on almost every single one of those Gantt charts. So it either tells you that we are massively behind, or we're behind on changing the status of it, or that it wasn't really needed as part of a critical path to delivery of improvement. And I'm not quite sure which it is of those, but it is a systemic issue that the Gantt charts don't really, I think, give you a picture of what's been going on. Talking about going on, my last point, though, is we are now in the transition from last year, when we hoped to exit by now, and we haven't, and the future year, when I recognise we need yet to get approval for the NOF4 exit criteria, and thus the plans to achieve that. But what are the learnings from the year that's just gone? And I recognise the complexity and depth of the situation means there may not be a simple answer. But the question is, are there some systemic overriding issues around being too ambitious, not having the resources that we needed, not understanding the time it takes to do things? is there inertia in the system? Are there any themes that we can look at from the year that's just closed to build into our plans for the next year? And I accept that's a really big question, and then maybe the answer is you can't do it at that level. You've really got to drill into each area. But what do we really think are the lessons learned from last year, and have we learned them?
I think
Thank you.
Bill indicated that he would like to come in first, so I'm going to
I'll probably come in on the last point and then give a hospital pass to Anthony to do the first 2 or 3. So I think the lessons learned, I think they're quite significant, really. So we focused very much last year on a system recovery plan, and I think particularly about the financial improvement and financial recovery, that was looking at the delivery of savings across organisations and looking at those things that we could do as a system. I think it became clear during the course of last year, probably month 7 onwards, that we hadn't got sufficient grip and control in the system, and that the assurance that we were taking as the system leaders was not something that was necessarily evidenced, and that's when we put in place workforce controls that made a significant change. This year, we're focused on 2 things. So one is, how do we deliver those schemes that didn't get delivered last year at pace and at scale, and how do we ensure that they're appropriately resourced? And part of that is having our own system programme management office, excuse me, something that we didn't have last year. I don't think we can say that we had an issue in terms of resource, because as this board and the subcommittees will be aware, we did spend on consultancy support. That helped us to get to a position where we had greater bandwidth and capability, and one of the agreements that we made with NHSE in terms of region was that we would shift that and pivot that into the PMO that we've now got. So we've got more of that resource. It's still being built at this point in time, but we've established a programme management office, and that programme management approach, I think, is something that's absolutely critical for us delivering in this year. We'll also ensure with the grip and control that we've got clearer understanding of workforce. I think what we've got now that we didn't have last year is each of the chief people officers in organisations alongside peers meet regularly, and they regularly go through workforce, and pay will be a significant determinant of whether we deliver our financial position or not. Last year we were being reassured about the workforce controls that are in place. This year that's very, very rigorously about going through those controls. So I think continue with the things that we did, working at pace, making sure that we've got the resources internally to drive that forward, and allying that to grip and control in a way that wasn't always evident for the whole of the last financial year. I think those are the major changes and the major learnings, certainly from my perspective.
Thank you, Anthony, and I think Alison's indicating she'd like to come back in on this point as well. So.
Certainly. I'd agree with Bill's response there. I think definitely some key learnings for us. In terms of actually delivery elements, and I think we do need to look at the Gantt charts, and we'll make sure that that is corrected, both in terms of the schemes that are going to continue, or the programmes that are going to continue, but also the new elements coming forward. I think there are a couple of other things in terms of external factors. So elective, obviously, don't want to go on about industrial action, massive impact in terms of our elective recovery, and actually continued reworking after every episode of industrial action. So it's always good to see that's coming back to haunt us next month as well. So that being said, I think the team did a really good job in terms of that course correction. But we do know that actually if there hadn't been industrial action, we would have been on trajectory and have surpassed it in some areas as well. I think the UEC component, though, is slightly more complex, and mainly because of the interdependencies, and I don't think we necessarily tested the interdependencies as well as we should have done, and actually what we were going to get from those individual programmes. I think we've got a very different approach this year, which has been somewhat informed by the March challenge, i.e. let's do all we can to get to 77%, and what is within our own gift, whichever organisation we're in. And actually we saw a huge improvement where people focused on what was happening within their own 4 walls. And again, that's a key lesson for us, is not everything is a system response, but actually some things are. And really focusing on those key enablers that we can help providers with in terms of reducing demand and actually getting our providers to focus on what is happening within their organisations. I think it's a very different approach, and hopefully one that's firstly easier to track and monitor in terms of delivery, but also that we can then really look at those interdependencies and make sure we're doing the right things.
Thank you. And then briefly, I think, Alison, you wanted to come back on that point.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's important to look at the areas that perhaps have been more successful than others, and what have been the defining factors. And if we look at the elective performance, and it's probably the most improved area across Devon, what has been successful there are three things. First is the depth of planning, so really, really clear, very detailed plans. The trajectories then that were able to be tracked week on week, month on month, to enable mitigating action to be taken, and the leadership, and particularly the clinical leadership, that was shown with the support of Tim Briggs, but also other clinical leaders in the system. And that is a formula that we know that works. And I think that the confidence that the board can take about the planning for 24-25 is that that is being replicated across the UEC area particularly. That's really detailed planning where the impact of all of the interventions is clear, where those are measurable, they can be tracked, and the mitigating actions taken with the right clinical leadership. And I think to Bill's point around the financial savings, the blend of both the strategic system-wide and the operational organisational focused savings plans have to have that same level of depth of planning and tracking. So it's almost sort of, linking, Steve, to your paper later on the agenda around the governance and the holding to account arrangements. It is about all of the suite of those things that has to be right to enable the progress to be made. And I think that's the key learning that has come out of this year, that isn't rocket science, but actually lays the path for better performance oversight and delivery in 24-25.
Thank you. And Mark Cook, I think you were wanting to come in on this point, or was it on a different point?
No, the same point, and the reflections on Graham's comments. Just some learning from the NHS England regional and national perspective to add to Alison's comments. I think Bill mentioned about the assurance processes, and I think we've learned that there's been a lot of assurance to us rather than to your constituent boards, and that's something that we've agreed needs to be addressed in the next sort of phase of the NOF4 process. Often things are done for us because we're NHS England, rather than we take assurance from what you do as individual sovereign boards, and I think that's a really important point to make. I think we've all acknowledged that the ownership and mutual accountability of the constituent elements, because remember, there's 4 organisations in NOF4, although we've tried very hard to treat it as a single system approach. Technically, there are 4 organisations in Devon in NOF4. So we've had to balance that with the way that we as NHS England hold individual organisations to account, but do that through a kind of system lens. So we've learned a lot about how we can get the organisations to actually own and mutually hold each other to account. I think that's going to be addressed in the next round. Linked to that is the governance and delegated responsibilities. So sovereign board ceding accountability to system. I think there's been quite a lot of confusion amongst various organisations about who actually makes the final decision to take forward plans under the NOF4 framework. And then finally, I think Bill also alluded to the capacity for delivery and implementation. You've got a massive, massive challenge, and have had for a number of years. I think this is a fantastic opportunity now to really progress at pace. You've done a huge amount in the last year or two to put the really good foundations, made lots of progress in some really good areas. But there are some really key, I think, as Alison said, some key things that will need lots of investment, capital funding, new transformation ways of working, which will require lots of collective resource and capability and capacity to be able to deliver that. The quid pro quo, there's been a lot of learning for us as well as NHS England. We need better coordination because we're forever tramping on your patch. Lots of different teams telling you lots of different things about how to do things well. We need to have that much better coordinated so you've got a much better fighting chance of delivering a single plan in a joined up way with the granular detail that Alison alluded to. That means you can really make progress in the next 12 months.
Thank you, Mark. That's really helpful. I'm going to come next to Tandy Hara and then to Kevin Orford.
Yeah, so I just wanted to make a comment about the timing and, I mean, clearly everybody's disappointed that we haven't or we aren't going to come out of North 4. But I think if we're honest with ourselves, I don't think that there's been many points across the year where we actually thought we would come out at this point. My worry is that if that's because we've been too ambitious about the timing of our coming out, and we know people have worked so hard, but we still have to go back to people and say, oh, actually, we still haven't made it. We're going to be in a situation where people start to believe that we actually can't come out. So is this an issue of maybe taking all of everything else into account, the strike action and all of those other challenges that have, come in on top of everything else? Was this timing ever realistic that it could have been met and that there's stuff that we know we could have done to actually meet it at this time, or it wasn't really going to happen? And in that case, how are we going to plan for the next tranche and the next try to be sure that when we actually do give it a go, we have got a good fighting chance and we can believe that we'll be able to do it? I'm just concerned that we may have been overambitious given everything else that's gone on, and that really the chances of being out at this time may not have been there. But also, given that, is it not the case that we are being marked fairly given everything else that's gone through? So I just wanted to sort of have a comment on that particular point.
Thank you very much, Tandy. I know that Steve wants to sum up, and I think that's going to be an important part of the summing up. So if you're happy, I'm going to leave this to the end for Steve to respond to in his summing up, because I think that is a really important point. So, Kevin, can I ask you to bring your comment in as well, and then we can see whether it's something that Steve could cover too?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. But the points I was going to raise have actually been addressed in the responses to other questions, so I don't need to ask anything further. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to come to Steve, if you'd like to summarise for us. Thank you.
I might not be able to summarise, but there's a couple of points I wanted to make just in reflection. And thanks for the discussion. I think it is important that we spend time on this, and this does slightly merge into the next paper that we're going to talk about as well, which is about how we move forward. I think to pick up Tandy's point first, if I may, I mean, it's difficult probably at a personal level, Tandy, for me to comment on whether we were over-ambitious last year, whether the confounding factors, as you mentioned, meant that despite planning, we weren't able to get to the position we needed to exit NOF 4 in the way that we planned. However, I can say now I think we do have a fighting chance this year for many of the reasons that have already been said. To link it to Graham's point about what will be different, and I was going to say a little bit about this on the next paper, but as well as the specific issues that other members around the table have raised, there were some systemic issues, I think, that we've reflected on as a system a month or two ago. So we had all of the exec teams in asking the question, actually, about why is it that we failed? Why did it not happen? And I think from that, three things arose, which I hope you will see we've made inroads into in the plan that's in the next paper. The first of those was this very strong message about we need to work as a system. And I think if I had to add anything to what Alison said about the success of planned care, it's that there were system-level solutions as well, that there was a willingness for providers to work together on things. I think there were some good examples, particularly between Torbay and Exeter, that enabled some of that to work. But there was a genuine reflection in the room that perhaps the system hadn't worked strongly together as it could have done. The second issue, as everyone said around the table, was having detailed depth in our planning. That it seemed that it was a lot of ambition, and maybe the ambition was right, but there was a lack of a detailed understanding of all the various steps that need to be taken in different organisations in order to deliver on any of the areas that that we were targeting. And it feels demonstrably different this year. I mean, I wouldn't want to over-assure the board. There are still areas where we've got to do work on really understanding the detail about how we're going to get from where we are to where we need to be. But it does, what everyone's telling me is it is in a much better position than it was. And then the third part, which again people have alluded to, is the governance and performance part of this. So how do we ensure that we're having the right discussions which are focused on improvement out in the system? And you'll see in the second of the next papers an effort to do two things really. One is to ensure that we're really clear about what the purpose of our system level group is, to do the things that we can only do at system level, but to focus our efforts into the locality catchments for each of our in each of our areas, and so that we can have a discussion with everybody in the room, primary care, our locality teams, the providers in the room, about the whole longitudinal stuff that we're trying to deal with. So it isn't about UEC separate from planned care, separate from money. We're having one conversation, and I think important to all of that is that we will be able to bring in a much stronger quality angle on all of that as well, which didn't feel like it was a particular feature of our system previously. So I think, to sort of answer Graham's point about systemic issues, for me those three things, because we've been unsurprisingly asked this question nationally a number of times, those are the things that I think will make it feel different this year, and will give us a better opportunity of doing what we've said we're going to do. A couple of other things that were raised earlier. So I think there's something just specifically on the learning from our previous investments, probably helpful to take that through a committee of the board, so a committee can have a look at what we've learned, the lessons we've learned, and we can bring back a discussion then, if you're happy with that, Chair. And just finally on the national meetings, yeah, having had the pleasure of being at a couple of them now, including the one in London, I was encouraged by them, having never done one before, so I don't necessarily have the history of other people around the table, although it's fair to say there were a number of new faces on our side of the table in that meeting. I was encouraged, partly because they share our ambition for improvement. You know, it isn't that we're on different sides. They are keen to see that we get better as a system for the sake of the patients that we serve. And also, in the latter stages of the meeting on the 20th of May, we started to have a much more detailed discussion around what is the long-term sustainability plan, which I think is a really positive thing for us, so that we are not just focused on the here and now, which is important, but we are being encouraged to think about how we create a sustainable system going forward. Now, their ambition was to try and do that faster than maybe we're able to achieve, but we're going to rise to that challenge as a system, so that we're working both on in the here and now, the issues that we face, but also starting to put the seeds down for a long-term sustainable future. So I was quite encouraged by all of that ambition and that sense that they do want to talk to us about long-term. I think probably that's all I'll say for now, and I've probably covered half of what I was going to say in the next paper as well.
Thank you, and I'd just like to reflect that this isn't an abstract concept, NOF4, and none of us around this table feel that. We are all acutely aware that it reflects real harm happening in our communities, and we will continue to do everything we can to work as a whole system to get this right. Obviously, it's very disappointing that we have to note that we're not able to provide assurance that we're going to exit on the date of Q1. But I hope that this discussion has reflected that we can take assurance from the process and the change and the learning that's taken place, so that we can meet that as soon as possible. With that, I think we'll move on to the next item. So this next item is about delivering the joint forward plan. And for this, we're looking for approval and endorsement. So could I ask Steve Moore if you could introduce this? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And again, this is a bit of a continuation from the last discussion, but sets out our plans for this year, both as an ICB and as a wider system. I will do a bit of a double act with Philippa on the second of the two papers, the System Oversight and Coordination paper, but I'll probably say a few words and may steal all of Philippa's thunder, so I apologise now. So just in terms of orientating around this, The plan that we have in place here is made up of two broad parts for us, which I think is a bit of a departure from previous years. The first is the operating plan. That's about how we're going to improve performance in our UEC planned care and delivering an approvable deficit position. I say that because clearly we don't want to be in deficit at all, but there is a recognition that we have we're on a pathway to get that back to a sustainable position over a period of time. And alongside that plan, a wider plan which is picking up the specific actions that we wish to take in the wider joint forward plan, where we genuinely think we can make progress, and I'll come back to that in a moment. You'll see the revised governance and assurance arrangements, as I've already mentioned, locality-focused performance improvement. It's intended to bring all parts of the system together and focusing on how we deliver plans and also how we find new solutions, because with the best will in the world and in a complex system that we have, some of our plans, however well developed, may not get us where we need to. So very much a focus on continuous planning and course correction, so that in the end what we aim to achieve is the outcomes, even if the way of getting there is different than we anticipate at this point. They will feed up to a refreshed SRB, System Recovery Board. We probably need to think of a better name for it, but we've got one at the moment which doesn't have a great acronym. But that board will do probably three broad things. It'll focus on just overseeing where local delivery is, feeding out of those locality discussions, and where necessary, where those are getting into challenging areas where we may be off trajectory, discussing what other system-wide solutions there might be for those things, so that the system pulls together if a particular part of it is getting into difficulty. It'll also focus on those issues, as I've mentioned, that we can only do at system level. And I think there's been some sense in the past that it's been difficult to know where to plug some of those things in. But we need areas where we can look at things like corporate back office, procurement, and clinical support services, and have a place where we can drive that as a system with everybody around the table. And that will be additionally supported by the UEC board and the finance group and workforce group, to both provide advice but also to be able to take things forward on our behalf. And then the third part is around our delivery of our internal ICB plans, the things that we have signed up to do, and ensuring that we are equally driving those plans as much as we are other parts of the system. You'll see on the operating plan targets, there's been a significant amount of work with our providers to develop. It's always a challenge to balance deliverability and ambition. And I think, having been through some national discussions, that the purpose of that was to check whether we'd got the balance of that right, because clearly we need to build confidence by delivery, but we also need to move quickly given the challenges that our patients and public experience in accessing our services at the moment. The actual detail of those were largely signed off in April, and as the Chair said, we'll look at the current position later on today in our private session. You'll see that in many of those areas, however, we're not forecasting to achieve the target for the broad reasons I've outlined, but we are looking to make significant progress in all areas, and we're expecting that improvement across all areas this year, which I think is a positive story for us. As I was able to say in both meetings with the national team, we should also take some confidence from the fact that there are green shoots that we're already seeing. So looking at our April performance gives us some optimism, because we slightly exceeded our targets for UEC and planned care. And I think a member of the national team reflected back that that's the first time they've heard that in Devon for some time. So it feels like we are making some progress. But I don't want to downplay the fact that we do have significant risks ahead and a lot of challenges to get all of this over the line, particularly our bandwidth and our ability to do what are some quite wide-ranging plans for change. On page 9 to 19, you'll see a summary of all of the objectives that we've set ourselves at exec level across the organisation. That's our JFP objectives, our statutory objectives, and the operating plan objectives where they apply. I've talked to each member of the exec team to encourage them to be realistic about what we can achieve. Of course, remember the context of the organisational change that we're going through as well for our own team, but to be as ambitious as we think we can be on those. some of those assessments are still going on. I think what we've tried to do in making the choices that we've made is to balance three broad things. One is doability, not just low-hanging fruit, but things that we think we can genuinely do because we're in a particular position, balanced against those things that are high priority that might be more challenging to do, but we just need to do them, and then balanced against our capacity to do that. So I think each of the members of the exec team tried their very best to balance all of those three things, but I would acknowledge that from a board perspective, there may be some challenge about the choices we have made and whether they're right or not, and I think we need to hear those, and then we need to bring back in July the final position on all of that. So today, I think, although it says for approval, I think what we're seeking, given that this is a milestone, is support for where we are, for recognition that we've got further work to do, and that will bring back the full plan in July for full approval at that stage. And that we're also seeking agreement that the board assurance committees will review the objectives and plans to provide board with confidence on delivery and clarity on risks. And I should say, based on our discussion yesterday with some of the independent members, not looking for a yes/no, looking for a balance of confidence about whether we think we've got a sufficiently detailed level of plans that are going to deliver what we need to deliver, and that can then feed into our assurance processes. If you're okay, Chair, I'll just hand over to Philippa in case there's anything further to say on the second of the two papers in this section, and then happy to take any questions.
Just before I hand over to Philippa, could I just ask us to just correct the papers, because there was a very important couple of words missing from the end of Objective 74, where it should read, develop the ICB as an anchor organisation by March 2025 to strengthen community ties and improve local health and well-being. It's just that those two important words at the end were not present, so that's great. So thank you very much, Steve, and over to Philippa Harding.
Thank you. And in the spirit of that, I think it's important to note that the structure chart of the governance and assurance structures shows the locality meeting slightly misaligned to various partner trusts, and that needs to be reflected as well. So apologies for that. I think Steve covered pretty much everything that I was going to cover, which shows how much in sync we are, which is helpful. Yeah. I think the only 2 points that I would make in addition are that is to reiterate that this is a work in progress. This is not the end. We are planning to do further work, as Steve said, and I think you can only go so far in terms of establishing terms of reference and structure charts. You need to work through work programmes as well. And I think it's important to recognise that as part of this, we're not proposing the disestablishment of any current committees. We need to work through the transitional handing over of work from those as well. So I wanted to emphasise that, and there will be an opportunity to have a further consideration of any significant changes coming out of the review of those delivery plans underpinning the annual plan and those conversations with committees at the next board meeting. And then I think the only other piece that I wanted to flag was the work that we're proposing to do in terms of a compact with our partners across the system, because I think systems and processes take you so far, but culture and behaviours and getting standards that are shared will take you further as well. So I think it's just to point that out.
Thank you. And I know there are a lot of questions. I'm going to come first to Graham Clark, who's caught my eye.
Thank you. OK, so I understand the point about not jumping all the fences at once, but we will be at least a third of the way through this financial year before we have a plan agreed. So I think my first point is I'm assuming that work is still going on to deliver some of this, not we're waiting to sign off a plan. From a corporate perspective, I've never been in an organisation that doesn't have a budget and a plan in place before the start of that period. Moving on, though, I think there are some key assumptions that underpin all of this, and I think they're either implicit or I think more helpfully explicitly set out. So these are my explicit views about what the assumptions are that underpin both of these. One is the adequacy of the resources and our ability to juggle, because I know prioritisation is not simple. It's not, do I do this or don't I? It's the degrees. So it's not a resource plan yet, and people here have heard me say before, resourcing is really important because that's what limits what we can do. So resourcing. Productivity improvement in all sorts of areas is absolutely essential. Can we achieve that? Don't know the impact of industrial action, but we do know there's some coming up, and that's what's derailed us in large part in the last year. We are moving to a different governance structure. I find I'm very encouraged by it, but nevertheless, it is an uncertain model. And I don't know whether those will fully deliver. I hope they do, but there is an assumption that they will. And my last and final assumption is that we will indeed move to better system collaborative working, and in particular that the move towards more LCP-based approaches is going to be the way going. We're down to 3 rather than the 5 that we used to have. We'd previously had some concerns about the maturity there, but we're now clearly putting more emphasis on it. So I think there are 5 key assumptions that are underpinning the success of this plan. So I don't know if you want to comment back, but my views.
Yeah, I think they're a good summary, Graham, of that. And I think on each of those, there's probably varying levels of explicitness about them. So the adequacy of resources one, I think, is an ongoing challenge, but I do think we're probably more explicit about where that is, how the RISP process, as Alison referred to, which, or the not for double-edged sword, actually helps us with that and being able to target some of that additional resource in the areas that we really need it. So that feels to me one that at least we're cognizant of. We may not have entirely nailed. I think the productivity improvement piece, I think it's probably fair to say our providers are confident about what they put in. They've gone for things where they know they can improve productivity rather than an aspiration. But again, you know, as you say, some of the confounding factors like industrial action might make that difficult, but we can only plan on the basis of what we know today, and we're going to have to deal with the latest announcements recently made. The governance, yeah, is an interesting one. I mean, I think if some of that reflection we had as senior leadership teams across the system was that the governance maybe didn't drive us as fast as it should have previously, and there was a danger in that there were too many meetings going on, and that there were quite a lot of talking, but not so much action. I think what sits behind the governance for me, if there's an assumption behind it, is that it's going to be about the actions we're taking and how we are continuously discussing how far we've got with that and what else we need to do. So a much more practical governance, but it is a risk because it is a change in the way that we're going to work. So I think we'll need to keep that under review. And the collaborative working, you know, everything's telling me, and all of my discussions are telling me that that is improving significantly. I do think there are some areas, if not at senior level, of course, it's how far down through organisations collaboration really reaches. And we will be using the SRB replacement group to look at some opportunities which will require different types of collaboration, you know, how we make use of spare capacity in the system in a way that means that sovereign organisations will need to think about that. But I get a sense everyone is open to that discussion. The proof will be in the pudding of testing that in those discussions. But I'm fairly confident at this stage from what I've seen. Hopefully that helps.
Kevin Orford.
Thanks, Chair. And first of all, I just want to say it's just really good to see the operational plan set out in the context of an annual plan, which is the first time that we've done this since we've been an ICB, and I think it is really helpful to us, both operationally and in governance terms, to see it presented like that. So my questions about it aren't about any unease that I've got about the process that we've gone in. I know we'll continue to develop this, and the 25-26 plan will have dealt this further. But they are around just ensuring that the governance around this is clear to us, and there probably is a bit more work to be done around that. So in the objectives which are set out against each of our chief officers, lots of them are termed as, you know, to improve, to increase, to reduce, to enhance, to do more of, to do less of, but they're not quantified. And I think it would be helpful as we are bringing these into the governance of our committees that we understand what really is the level of ambition around those. For the operational plan, we've red, amber and green lighted the what we think is going to be, well, a delivery confidence, we're calling it. So it would be useful, as the chair of my committee that will be overseeing some of this, to just understand the delivery confidence around each of those objectives that are in the annual plan, so that we know what it is that we are giving assurance to the board on when we report back from those committees. So that's and lots of that work can be done in committees. It doesn't need to be done at the board. We can do it outside of the meeting, but I just think I'd like to tighten that up before it comes into the committees. But my overall thing is I really applaud the work that's gone on around this, and I know a lot of work has gone on to get us to this point. So thank you for everything that's happened so far.
Just on one specific point, the quantification of objectives I think is going to be an important part of the work. So we do need to change those words from how they're expressed to specifics that we're going to do. But that's the work over the next month or so, and I think that will flush out exactly how far we can go with some of these.
Just before I come to Liz Davenport, can I just add to one of Kevin's points, and that is that I notice in point 19 that chief officers have been asked to prioritise against which remain achievable over 24-25. And I just want to be really clear that we're not just going to prioritise on the basis of what can be completed, but on the basis of clinical need, because I think otherwise it looks like that's going to be our chief priority.
Yeah, I think it's probably what I said. I think the paper may have been slightly too simple in that regard, in that it is a balance of the things that are doable that we can really make progress on, those things that we must do, even if it's going to challenge us with our capacity for all sorts of reasons, as you say, for reasons of the experience of patients, but also some of our statutory responsibilities, and then matching that against our capacity. So it's still very much a work in progress from that regard, but balancing those three things is really important. I think we will need to be clear with the board where there may be really important things that that we feel we should be making progress on, where we just don't feel we have to. But until we've done this piece of work, it's difficult to be clear about where those areas are.
Thank you. Liz Davenport.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I would echo the comments from before. I think it's a really impactful piece of work, and it speaks to the volume of the expectation that I think we need to have our eyes wide open to. Just a couple of comments from me. One is in relation to the compact. I think we should welcome that. I think we've seen real significant improvements in collaboration across the system, but I think being able to specify that in a way that we can be really clear with each other about expectations and what good looks like. For me, there's a link to the second paper later on around organisational development and how we align some of our organisational development efforts across the system in support of that, because I think that's where we could have some positive impact. In terms of the this governance structure, I see it's work in progress, and I do welcome the suggestion of having collaborative engagement meetings. So I think it starts to answer a question that we've had for some time about what the relationship is between ICBs and how we work that in practice and the collaborative. I think if we do the further work on it, there's a couple of things I think we need to pay attention to. For us, in the acute provider collaborative, which I've got particular interest in, is making sure that we think a bit about the implications for Cornwall and how we might want to align it to some of the joint planning ambition that we had with Cornwall. And I think for us, we also need to pay attention to, in having those meetings, how do you make sure that you hold the provider accountability and drive to deliver whilst having that relationship with the ICB? But I really welcome it and look forward to having some maybe more detailed conversation about how we can evolve those proposals. And then the final comment for me is in relation to LCPs. And again, I think having that place-based focus is going to be really important, and that we support the development of those. I know we've gone from 5 to 3, and I think that probably makes a lot of sense, but just want to make sure that in grouping it around 3, we're paying attention to where those key collaborations are across the system, and that we're not interfering where the key patient flows are. But again, I think that's work that we could progress together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then I think I'd stay outside the room for a moment and come to Tandy Hara next.
Yes, so I have to agree with those who say this piece of work is a really good piece of work, and I think that for me, for the first time, I sort of saw this piece of work connecting all of those other plans, the joint forward plan, the operating plan, and then connecting it all to sort of give that picture of where we're heading. So I think I was quite encouraged with that. But looking at the objectives, I'm just wondering, I didn't really feel or see the prevention agenda coming through in that particular one. I'm pretty sure Sheena will have more words than I have to say on that particular one, but I think the prevention agenda is just not coming through in there at all. The second one was around, and I think maybe this is just a placement issue, the EDI agenda. I know that's under the comms and corporate affairs, but I did wonder whether we also want to sort of reflect that in the chief people officer's remit. I just thought that was a little bit odd that in that space about people, there just isn't a mention of inclusion or equality and diversity. It might just be a matter of just referencing the two. I think it does need to sort of reflect in that. And then there's Objective 85 on research and innovation. I thought that sort of just comes across as a little bit of half attempt to reference research and innovation. It's got a condition there, as in depending on what happens to recruitment in phase 2. But I think if it's important enough to be there, we do need to be a bit more precise as in whether we want it to have it in there or not. So that's all my comments.
Thank you. And I know that both Nigel and Piers would like to immediately respond. So Nigel Aitchison first and then Piers Tetley.
Thanks, Tandy. You're absolutely right in terms of the population health and prevention agenda. When we were compiling this list as individual chief officers, there are some absolutely critical codependencies which are part of our restructuring, and what we're planning to do is to bring which will mean we are much better able to define those areas and where the accountability resource needs to sit in order to be able to deliver them. And so what we're planning to do is to bring that back as a separate piece of work to board to describe our approach to that when Anthony, myself and other chief officers have had a chance to do exactly that piece, which is to work out what the resources is required, what we've got, and how we're able to describe what we're able to deliver. And that's a piece of work that's not just going on internally, but it's a piece of work that we're really grateful to colleagues at Region for their support with. So it's what we want to be able to do is present that to board in a way that that we can have a conversation that helps us describe much better for this year actually what the outcomes we're going to see are going to be. So that's the reason why that doesn't appear in that form.
Thank you. And I can see Penny wants to come in on this specific point as well before I come to Piers on the workforce.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
And it does talk really to us thinking about the impact. So we talk about EQIAs, quality impact assessments, very often when we're looking at it in a deficit situation of when we're looking at financial recovery and so forth. Obviously, there's a positive impact on our prospective work that we're planning to do. And I'm not proposing that we do full EQIAs, but that has to be the lens through which we look at this plan. And I would expect equality and quality to be a golden thread that runs through every single part of this plan, because it should be focused on the needs of the population of Devon.
Thank you. And Piers.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And just to expand a little bit on what both of my two colleagues have just said. So one of the guiding principles you'll remember of the restructuring programme that we entered into last year now for phase 1 was that we break down the previous barriers between directorates and we establish a much more effective matrix way of working. And so this plan reflects that. Although there are responsibilities sitting in one director's portfolio, actually we recognise as a leadership team that we have to work collaboratively together in order to deliver them. So you mustn't take it to mean that if it sits under one executive director's portfolio that it is just that person that will be responsible for delivering it. It will be a team effort in many instances. And if you look from a people point of view, there's a number of people responsibilities that sit in finance, in COO, in other colleagues' portfolios as well. So I think hopefully you can see that as a positive. Actually, this is another positive step in terms of how we have evolved as an organisation through our change processes. Thank you.
Thank you. Sheena, you did have your hand up and then it went down. Is that because your point had been addressed? Thank you very much. In that case, I'm going to come back into the room to Judy Hargaden.
Thanks very much. So a couple of thoughts on the plan and then on the structure. Like others, I thought this was a great piece of work, and I have to say, weird though it sounds, that I really enjoyed reading the board papers this time, because there was a real sense of connectivity in the whole agenda. There's one paper would mention that another paper later on in the agenda was bringing it together. So actually, it's really great that we're taking these two things together as a discussion. Sorry, just time to give a bit of praise. On the plan, I think both Nigel and Piers have just partly covered this, but for me it did feel like a bunch of separate agendas for different people. And I guess because we've all been a bit sensitive about this in the past, you're working together, but the plan doesn't necessarily say that. And I wonder if you might consider starting with some overview objectives rather than going straight into. I know you've got but there's, and I'll give you a couple, for example. I think implementing a population health management approach is for everybody to do, because it's about how you allocate resources. It's about how you look. For example, we're talking all the time in our recovery plans about reducing cost, about meeting targets. Well, you can do that, but you can do that and improve population health at the same time if you have that population health mindset. And I'll come back to that point in a moment. The other thing I would suggest that we ought to have in this, I've got one or two minor comments that I'll send to individuals, is something on system infrastructure. I do think that's a leadership role we should be playing. I, in particular, am coming at it because of my anxieties about primary care and some of the fragility in primary care. But I think that's another overview role that we as an integrated care board have. It's population health, it's the system to deliver into the future, and feeds into some of what you talked about in terms of the long-term stuff. So I would like a feel, and I'd like it to link to the ICB objectives, which I couldn't find in it. So it's kind of all nearly there, but it needs that kind of umbrella at the front or something. On the structures, again, I think this is a brilliant piece of work, and all credit to Philippa, who's been working on this for a long time, but actually to Steve on supporting her in getting this through. But all the structures in the world and all the best terms of reference won't work if you don't have the right people in the room. And I would urge you to have another look. My iPad's gone off while I'm talking, but page 127 in the papers, 2.5, it says that the System Recovery Plan Board, whatever it's to be called now, will oversee the allocation of system resource and ensure it is managed to deliver the greatest impact. And for me, that gives that committee enormous power. It's not that they make the final decisions. I understand those go to executive and to the board, but the place where the discussion takes place is actually where that detail perspective comes in. So I would like to see that in that group you have other perspectives, not, so I of course would say primary care, not because I think everybody should have a representative, but it's a mindset, it's a different way of thinking. I would also seriously consider putting the Director of Population Health in as the support team there. Because if you're in there when the discussion is taking place, you can see all those opportunities and you can see some of the potential errors and the stuff that Anthony was talking about earlier, going through how we've invested some of our money when it's come for special projects, has at times not been good enough because there hasn't been a broad perspective in the room. So I would just ask you to think about that again.
Steve, did you want to come back on this?
Yeah, I'll come back on a couple of those if I may. I think if we have a benchmark of people enjoying reading their board papers, then I think we've made it as an organisation. So, Judy, I will check in at every meeting. On the objectives thing, I guess my observations at the moment are we've got a very large number of very specific objectives. So there's almost too many, and we do need to bring them up a level, and that's a work in progress, I think, and we'll be able to make progress in that for next year. But to very much see them as team objectives that individual execs are leading on, because one of the key things for board members is you need to know who to eyeball about things, even if you recognise that actually the wider team is contributing to that, and particularly given the size both of our team and the organisation put against the scale of the challenge we've got. If we don't work together on those things, then we will fail. On the right people in the room, a couple of things to say about that. I think, you're right, all the governance in the world won't achieve anything if you don't have two things right, I would say. One is absolutely the right people in the room. We will reflect on the feedback we've had, because I think we have to balance the need to have useful discussions with having all the right people in the room and not making it a talking shop. But I think we maybe got that balance wrong, so we just need to think about that. And those other perspectives are really valuable in all of this, particularly if they're going to move us towards a much more rounded view of the causes of being in NOF4. I think the other thing I would add to that, though, as well, is that the people in that governance system need to trust each other. They need to be able to work together. There needs to be a level of sort of collegiate working. So what's not in here, and actually is in early stages, is not in our OD plan yet, but it's very much in mine and Katie's mind, is we need more system level time together, so that the leaders have got time to think a bit more strategically, to think about how we're working as a team. I think a combination of all of those things will mean we'll make much more progress than if we just have a good governance system. So we'll take all that back for reflection, but I think some really, really helpful feedback.
Thank you. And I know that building on that, Frank O'Kelly would like to come in. I'm conscious, Alison, that you're waiting as well, but I know Frank will want to follow up on Judy's points. Thank you, Frank.
Yeah, it was very much to sort of reinforce the points Judy's been making. I mean, we are going to have to move to a social model of care from a very medical model of care, because we don't have enough states, we don't have enough people, we don't have enough finance. And in order for that to happen, we have to have the right people in the room. I think the structural diagram is fantastic. I think the narrative that goes with it, that explains how we will develop and move towards localities, is really good. The provider collaboratives are in very, very different places, and the most immature by a very long way is the primary care provider collaborative. And that's why we can signal to the whole system by putting some community input into the SPRDG, as it is now, that we are thinking about change. And that if you have people who come from a completely different perspective, you will end up with a different outcome. And I'll give you an example. We're talking about workforce, but actually I've been saying for 2 years we're not got the figures for the primary and community care workforce. And that if I was, if somebody was in that room saying that every single time there was a meeting, then we would start looking at those things. So I very strongly feel that that group needs a community perspective in it going forward. And I think the benefit of the signalling to other people outside is really, really important.
And that's come across very strongly in the feedback, I know, Steve, and I don't know whether you want to comment more other than
just
say
that I agree. Given our discussion yesterday, I think there is the practicality of how do you get primary care in the room, given it's such a disparate thing. So I think we'll just need to think about it, maybe talk to you about how we achieve that in a way which means the person in the room or the people in the room are genuinely feel they can be part of the conversation. So we just need to work on that, but I agree with the principle.
Alison, thank you for your patience. I'm going to bring Alison Williams in. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of things. I think on the objectives, Steve, one of the things as they become more refined, it might be helpful to do is to map those across to the revised exit criteria for NOV4 and the supporting measures, because then what you can do is have one set of smart objectives that fulfil all purposes. So I'd be happy to help with that if that's useful when those are further refined. And two other sort of quick points. One is that local authority chief execs, I'm not sure if Donna's in the room today, sorry, I can't see who's round the table, but there have been a few attempts with the leadership to engage the local authority chief execs directly, particularly in the strategic planning and forward thinking in the ICB. And I think there will be a way of doing that appropriately in the new structure, but it might be helpful to just ask for their views outside of this about how they feel that they could contribute most effectively to whole system working in the new structure. And then just one final point, and that's a technicality more than anything else, and that's on page 117.26, and reference to the Tier 1 meetings. And it would be absolutely great if the Tier 1 meetings could be dropped in favour of the local assurance arrangements. But unfortunately, that will be the national team, won't even be the regional team that will make that decision. But I think it's a real good ambition that becomes the place that feeds the Tier 1. And when, hopefully, fairly shortly, the system is able to drop out of Tier 1, then that momentum can be maintained through those arrangements. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark, did you have any follow-up points on that?
Yeah, thank you. I agree entirely with what Alison's just said. Just a couple of other points as well to pick up some that were made here and a couple to add. It's great that you've got a joined-up approach to the planning, and it's just really interesting, isn't it, that a lot of the things that you've listed in terms of where you've drawn things to consolidate are things that NHS England ask you to do, and they're all slightly different. So we've recognised that, and we're doing quite a piece of work with Sam and the other 6 systems in the southwest to try and get a more generic approach so that, as I said earlier, we can take assurance from your board reporting rather than us asking you to do things 4 or 5 times separately and slightly differently. So really welcome the approach. I think it's excellent. There is also a piece of work going on nationally around, for those of you who've been around as long as I have, something called the Intelligent Board, which is resurfacing. So there's a piece of policy work which people will invite ICBs to be part of, but the work we're doing across the southwest hopefully will inform that anyway. So that's just something perhaps to be aware of. In terms of the content, really agree with the front ending of this really needs to be around the 4 objectives of the ICB and the requirements that you are expected to have due regard for in terms of the ICP strategy, of course. And also the infrastructure comment, I think, is really, really important. Estates and digital, although usually quite strategic, do have a massive impact, and there's a lot of risk around both estates and digital, cyber attacks, not having an EPR, systems going down on a fairly regular basis, causing lots of difficulties within operational issues. RAC, for example, I know not hugely relevant here, but those sorts of things do create operational, and for the ICB and its system partners to have an overview of all of that, I think operationally should be quite important, but recognise we as NHS England don't require you to do that either, but I think we probably will in future. And then finally, just a little bit of a challenge, really. Would all of your constituent boards recognise this paper and this planning process and feel part of it? I think is something just perhaps to think about.
Thank you. Now, I'm very conscious of time, so I'm going to ask for one final brief question or comment from you, Graham, and then we will need to move on.
Thank you. I think it's probably as a comment, actually. Annex A, the revised governance structure, which I do like a lot, but I just point out there are 4 umbrella entities in it. There's a board, there's SIAG, there's the recovery group, whatever it ends up being named, and there's the partnership. And I think it's really important that we are very clear who does what and where and how they communicate and how things flow and who makes decisions, etc. To make sure that there is clarity in what's going on. And particularly, I think it's important around the workforce piece. I'm back to my productivity piece, and it affects performance, it affects money. And I did have a slight question mark about the terms of reference for the people on OD committee. I'm very conscious that we've moved into a world of no longer single organisation accountabilities, joint accountabilities. But we are cognizant of sovereign boards and various providers, and I wasn't quite sure I understand what those terms of reference do, or where decisions really will be made about resourcing. Thank you.
Philippa, did you want to come back on that point?
So I think happy to, and Piers may want to jump in as well, because we've been working together on the terms of reference. I think one of the learning points from last year was the lack of assurance in relation to workforce controls. So that is really a key driving point in the consideration of this committee. However, there are many more issues that need to be addressed through this committee as well, not least the requirement to have a people board for the system as well. So I think this is one area where we will definitely be working through in a lot more detail to make sure that we've got the terms of reference right. But Piers might want to come in.
Yeah, thank you, Philippa. No, I think you said it all, really. We've been very careful in our thinking about how we establish this committee. It is a development, it is a new committee or a revised committee than one we've had before. You're absolutely right, getting the right balance with assurance at system level, not undermining what organisations are doing, but reflecting what collectively are working on together is going to be really important. Bill referenced it earlier about one of the ingredients to improvement with this year's operational plan and how we've improved over the last year has been how one of the parts of that has been how chief people officers, chief finance officers have been working much more collaboratively together. And so this committee will have to reflect that. So although I think the agenda is much broader than it has been in the past, and I think that can only be a good thing. Having said all of those things, we've been very thoughtful about how we develop it and working with our with whoever chairs the new committee. We'll continue to be mindful of that, Graham, and if we haven't quite got it right, we will seek to evolve it further.
Thank you. So apologies that we've run over time on, but I think it's really important that everyone had the opportunity to come in. So thank you for your points and also for the detailed feedback that's been received in advance. So mindful of that, we had originally asked for approval of the corporate objectives, but what we're going to rephrase that because it's a work in progress as support for the process and recognise that we'll be bringing this back to a later board. So thank you. The other part of this, of course, was the system oversight and coordination. And again, thank you for those detailed points. And what I'd just like to seek approval of is for the proposed terms of reference for the following board committees. So we've got audit and risk, remuneration and internal ICB workforce, Population Health Improvement Committee, People and Organisational Development Committee, the Quality and Patient Experience Committee, Finance and Performance Committee, and the NHS Devon Executive. And also to note that we do also have the committee that Judy Hargaden chairs, which is the Primary Care Transition Committee, which we're not intending to stand down until it's very clearly identified where the functions of that committee are then going to sit going forward. And again, those committees, that will be, again, a work in progress with amendments that have been, that we've discussed. So could I ask for any comments? Judy? No, sorry, I thought it was support. So it was a hand up rather than a comment. So thank you very much. And I know there are various points where we've been asked to take assurance from the process, all of those which we've discussed, and I'm not proposing to go through bullet by bullet, but again, thank you very much for those detailed points. And so we're going to move on. Could I just check, because we were intending to take a break at 10:45, and because we're now running over time, I think sometimes it's easy for just everyone to just feel a bit tired. And the next piece, which is the organisational development plan, I'm just wondering whether really we'd be better just to have a brief break now and then come back so that we're all fresh in the room. Would everybody be happy with that if we just take a 10-minute comfort break now and then come back? Yes? Great. Okay, thank you very much. Right, so welcome back to part two, and we're now on to our section on the organisational development plan. And thank you, Steve, for introducing this item, and really delighted to have you with us as well, Katie Curley, Head of Organisational Development, and I know you're going to be coming in on this piece too, so thank you.
Yeah, it's great to have Katie here today, and I've really enjoyed our early discussions around this. This may feel a bit separate and different from the previous conversation we've just had around getting out of NOF4 and our annual plan and our JFP, but actually this is the really important underpinning of it. Someone famous once said, I was trying to Google it while we were having a break, that culture eats strategy for breakfast. If we haven't got the right culture, then no matter how good our governance, how good our plans, we won't have fertile ground in which to build it. And of course, as an organisation, as a team of people within the ICB who've been through some really difficult times at the moment, for reasons that we're well aware of, we're also starting, I would say, from a deficit position. And I think for me, my strong belief has always been that in organisations that are in distress, the place you start is with organisational development, with team development, with getting people to be willing to be on the pitch and to help out, because you've got challenges because of just the scale of what you're facing, and the only way that you can deal with that is through the creativity, perseverance of your teams, and you need to demonstrate that you're investing in that and you're supporting people to be absolutely the best they can be coming into work. So I'm really pleased to see this. I would say, and Katie will forgive me for saying this is a starting point. There is so much more to do in this space, and I know Katie's going to talk in a bit more detail about this, but we feel these are probably broadly the first three areas to look at. But I think I would say to the board, this is a multi-year journey to get us to the point where we need to get, and I'm really keen to ensure that we drive this just as hard as we drive the delivery of our plans. So, Katie, I hope I haven't stolen too much of your thunder, and I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Steve, and thank you, Chair. I will assume that everyone has read the paper, particularly after Judy's comments earlier. Just as a gentle reminder, some of the key elements that are in the paper. The paper has been based on feedback through the staff survey that we've had this year. It's been based on some directorate engagement sessions that we ran at the end of February with each of our directorates, and one-to-one feedback that we've received from staff across the organisation. The timing feels really imperative for this, as we're about to go through or in the middle of a significant organisational change. We need to focus on the way that we're going to work together, and in support of a new proposed structure to create an environment for us to improve both our organisation, how we work within a system, and our performance. We need to demonstrate a vision for the organisation where we are fit for the future. This is a long-term plan. As Steve has mentioned, this is a starting point. This is a significant journey for us as an organisation. We are proposing to start around three key priorities, which include a focus on our purpose and function as an ICB, really nailing and understanding what is different about an ICB as opposed to a CCG, and supporting staff to understand and identify with that. Board and executive development is the second key area of focus, and also determining and embedding an organisational culture. So really key in building the environment that we need to be able to flourish for the future. As part of the paper, I've set out principles in the way in which I would recommend that we work. That's very much focused on inclusion, co-design, supporting staff to be really involved in how we design and develop this process. I've also booked in some individual one-to-ones within the board members' diaries, and I've started to do that just to help me focus around thinking in the design of the work, to further understand your views on what it's like to currently work within the organisation, how it feels to be part of Devon ICB. So thank you for having me here today, and what I ask for you to do is to consider the recommendations within the paper, and I really look forward to hearing your feedback and any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nigel Aitchison.
Katie and indeed Steve, thank you for this. You know my passion for this area, and Katie, you and I have done work together, which I've thoroughly enjoyed. My question really is one for the rest of our colleagues, because this is something that, as Katie said, you know, they have contributed to, really look forward to, and I wondered in the recommendations if we might think about how we communicate the bringing of this paper and its what we're trying to set out to the rest of the staff, because I think this will be a huge a hugely welcomed piece of work, and I think it will also fit in, Steve, to the developing approach we're taking with colleagues, which is to be very open and transparent about how we want them to help us improve, you know, the launch on time of this phase 2. You know, this would just be another real opportunity for us. I just wonder if that's something we could consider.
Yeah, be happy to talk to Katie about how we can do that and promote following today's discussion. The fact that this has come to board, this is an important moment for us, and it does set us off on a journey that is going to be important for the future of this organisation. So we'll take that offline. Best way of doing that, but absolutely.
You had Graham waiting to come in, and then Judy. Graham Clark.
Thank you. So I think this is much needed. I think the timeliness is excellent. I very much support it. 2 points just to think about. It's headed a plan. I think it's more a strategy at this point. I think it will need further development as to who does what and when. It needs time set aside, which you correctly flag. So conversion into a plan and adequate timing, which could be a challenge given everything else that's being done. I think it is important. I think it does deserve the time. My second point is, again, one of my constant themes, which is I think we have to be careful not to just sit in this room in splendid isolation without recognition of our stakeholders. And I just wonder whether that first piece, which is allocated to the board, I would personally be really interested in talking to other stakeholders, particularly some of the larger providers, for their input to hear what they want. We have to think of ourselves, I think, to some degree, as a service organisation supporting, enabling and leading, not just telling. And that needs engagement and co-design. Thank you.
I don't know whether Katie wants to come on, but yeah, I think that's a good point, Graham. I think there's probably 2 strands to the board work for me. The second one, which I don't think is reflected in here, is about feedback from our system partners about what they want and hope and see. The bit that this really covers is an opportunity for us to start to lead from the front about the sort of team we want to be, how we want to work together, and our sense of what our common purpose is as a team. I think we need to link in that wider discussion, probably do a bit of both, but I think it needs to start here. My strong conviction is it starts with us, and then I think the rest of the system can follow our lead on some of that.
Thank you, Judy. Judy Hargadon.
Thank you. I wanted to as well support and endorse this report. It's been discussed at Remuneration Committee, and we were all very supportive of it there too. I wanted to add that I had done an assurance paper for the Remuneration Committee about the phase 1 implementation and lessons learned, and much of the lessons learned, I'm not getting my grammar right today, am I? Many of the lessons learned were actually about our organisation culture. So this is an absolute priority, and I think Katie's done a great job putting this together with colleagues, so thank you. I wanted to make sure the board understood that this costs. There will be a need for some external, I mean, a lot of it is about how you do things, so that's about all of us, but there will be some need for some external support on some bits of it at some point, and it needs time from all of us. And it needs time from our executives. So you know that long list of objectives we just discussed? I think this should go into the organisation's objectives too. It's not just a role for the people leader to lead, it's a role for everybody to be doing in their own teams. And after a while it becomes instinctive, it's a way of doing things, but at first it takes time and a bit of effort. So I'm just supporting it, but saying we must register it as a priority.
Thank you. Did you want to come back on that point, Anthony, or was it a new point on that point? A new point. Well, in that case, I'm going to come to Liz Davenport and Tandy Hara first, who've been, and then I'll come to you. So, Liz Davenport.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. And I think some of my points have been made. I think to Judy's point, this needs to be prioritised as part of the work rather than an added extra. And often these sort of things are things that are deprioritised, and I think it's keep a really strong focus. I agree that it entirely needs to focus on you creating your team within the ICB to start off with, but just to reiterate what I said earlier, I think some of the principles that absolutely sit at the heart of what I think is a really great paper also apply to the team that needs to be Team Devon. And I'd want us to take some of the learning from what you do here to that wider kind of conversation at the right time.
Thank you. Tandy.
Just a comment from me. I also agree totally. This is a really important piece of work, given everything else that's going on. I'm not sure whether we're going to see it again or not. So I'll just mention this point anyway, but I'm sure you've got it in your minds. I think that we might need to have a bit more of the how and the what. So obviously, this is sort of giving an idea of what we want to do, create a sense of belonging. But I think at some point we need to see what that means in action, just to make it a bit more action focused. But I'm sure you've got that in your mind. But it would just be really good to sort of see what the aspiration is and the action that will get us there to sort of have a good sense of whether we've got everything covered. But I totally support it.
Thank you. I've got Anthony Fitzgerald and Franco Kelly.
Thank you very much, and really good paper. Look forward to further conversations. I think there's a real opportunity to strengthen both the organisation and our working relationships with partner organisations. There's something very much around resilience and emergency preparedness, and I think some of the elements within this, going on to the previous points, around the practical must-dos, we need to make sure that we're equipping our staff and giving them the tools to do their job. EPRR really stands out, though, I think, in terms of a set of quantifiable training needs for individuals in leadership roles, and we could actually make something much stronger by doing that in partnership with other providers as well. So I look forward to further conversations around this, and I think actually there's some really, really good potential, and fully supported.
Thank you. And then finally, Franco Kelly.
Thank you. Thank you. Philippa, Katie and Steve have already mentioned culture. I think it's the thing we really need to spend quite a lot of time on. I was part of the faculty for the RCGP leadership course, and the person leading that was Valerie Isles, who some of you may well know. So I spent 3 years working with her, and she's written a book about really managing healthcare. And what she says we do is spend our time on the complicated easy, which is the systems and structures, and the simple hard, which is all the culture and how we get the best out of people, we naturally don't focus on. So I'm delighted that it's been mentioned 3 times already, that it's in this paper, because we will get much more out of everybody if we get the culture right for the organisation.
Thank you. That's a really important point to end on. Thank you. Sorry, Steve, you were... Piers, sorry, Piers. I beg your pardon. Piers Tetley.
Steve was first, but thank you. I will just nip in. I was going to say something very similar, and it's a good way of recognising that is precisely what we have done. We have focused on structure, partly because we've been in that challenging situation because of the imperative to reduce our running cost allocation costs and contribute to the wider system financial position. And it is, it won't have passed your notice, I'm sure, that the part of the paper and in Katie's introduction, she surfaced that in her presentation about the core purpose of what an ICB is and how that's different to a clinical commissioning group, which we transitioned from in June 2022, some time ago. And yet we are embarking on a major period of organisational change that has been going on now for a protracted period of time, in the absence of a complete clear picture of core purpose and reason for being and what's different. Now, we're in that situation because most ICBs are in that situation. We've had to respond to the imperative about reducing running costs, and that's absolutely right. But it has been a focus for a long period of time, and I think back to 2019 when we merged 2 CCGs. We've almost been in a constant period of change since then, actually. And the paper, if you read it, it gives you a bit of a summary. Since that merger in 2019, we had 17 executives, we've had 5 chief executives. That brings with it a tremendous level of change. And actually what you see with our staff now is a lack of sense of stability, a lack of sense of structure and confidence and knowing their core purpose and feeling safe to do that. So just as others have recognised, this is a really important step in the right direction to wrap around our structural reorganisation, which is one part of organisational change, and really focus now on building high-performing, successful teams, board, executive, and the wider organisation, so that we can deliver that operational plan that's incredibly ambitious. And it is a first step, as you said right at the beginning, Steve, that we have to take. Because if we're not a stable organisation, how can we lead and support the wider system? Exactly Liz's point. So I think we all recognise this is a first, very important step to stabilise the organisation, build a culture we all feel proud of, and recognise as something that we've contributed to. And then it must extend beyond that to include and encompass wider system, for all the reasons that other people have mentioned. But of course, from the people person in the room, you would expect me to support this, and I, in the background, have been working with Katie and Steve to do this. I do think, just as others have recognised, this is a very important step in the right direction, and I thank Steve for his leadership in this space too, because this has to be led from the very top of the organisation, and he's demonstrated that very ably in his introduction and support to this process. So thank you.
Thank you. So over to the very head of the organisation.
That's you. Valerie Isles, she's a complete inspiration to me. I read her book, Why Good People Do Bad Things. If anyone has, I used to give it out to people, just read it. It's quite a short book. It is a remarkable piece of work that really understands human beings and actually speaks to the heart of how cultures go bad. So if anyone hasn't read it around the table, please do. I think I've still got a copy somewhere. I think the point I would make is, I'll probably make a couple of points. We certainly do need to change the culture, but what you don't set out to do in an organisational development plan, in my view, is set out to change the culture. The culture is a result of a whole bunch of things coming together, which is why it needs to start at the top, because it's about what we attend to, what we talk about, how we behave amongst ourselves, how we behave with other people, and we can very much set those behaviours and expectations ourselves. So it's sort of unashamedly at the moment an inward-looking starting point for us, because it has to start around this table, and it very quickly then has to get out into our organisation. I think the skills development bit will come, but actually I think the first bit is to demonstrate to our teams, who, let's face it, we need them to do all of this amazing stuff that we've just signed off on our annual plan, demonstrate to them that we are in service to them, that they are the important ones who are going to make the difference out there. And again, that's a really strong message I think we need to be enacting as we're going through this. But to pick up Liz's point, I'm also then very keen that as a first step, that this becomes a system-wide effort. I mean, I think there's a lot of good examples of systematic working. How far it goes down within organisations, I'm not sure about. That's just my lack of knowledge. But we need to build very much a system-wide organisational and leadership development programme that allows for talent to come through, that shows people that we're investing in their skills and experience, that people have opportunities beyond their immediate organisations if they need to, and that we're bringing on the next generation from our own local communities as well. So this is a massive programme. It will be a decade of work, not simply a year. So we're just seeing it in that context. But if we can start here, if we can start with a demonstration around a change in what we talk about and how we behave, that will very quickly, I think, impact on our organisation, and then we can take some of the next steps. So I really commend this work. It will cost a bit of money, but to start with, probably not a huge amount, but we will need to find that.
Thank you. So what I'd like to do is just formally ask for everyone's support for the principles, for the actions that have been identified and the areas of focus as well. I know that Katie and the whole board would have heard the comments and feedback, but I think in addition to that, I'd like to ask that we formally agree to engage in and hold others accountable for engaging in this work, so that we can actually see it through to the end. So If everyone's happy with that, we will move on to the next item. So thank you very much, Katie. The next item is, I think, the citizen story, which is such an important part of our board. And I'm going to our board meetings. I'd just like to ask Penny Smith to introduce this item.
Thank you, Chair. So shortly we will watch a video of 19-year-old young man called Lachlan. He has various medical, physical and mental health needs and is part of the broader SEND agenda. And you will see him as being really eloquent, mature, and comes across as the real asset and shows the real asset that he is currently and will be in our community going forward. He's just sat his A-levels and so was unable to do the video very quickly, but we sequenced it in. So he's just finished his A-levels and he's been accepted to be an occupational therapist. So I'm sure Nigel, post the video, will be able to also talk more, recognising that Nigel has really been leading this part of the agenda up until the 1st of June when I take over. But without further ado, we should watch the clip.
Hello, I'm Lachlan Mitchell. I'm 19. I live just outside of Tavistock. So I have a condition called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is a lack of collagen. So nothing really holds together well. So it takes a lot of effort for my muscles to keep everything just intact. I've also got POTS and chronic fatigue. So with those, it's a lot of pacing and pain management, and I use a wheelchair to get around day to day. When that first happened, I was I'd been under paediatrics. So I had paediatrician, Dev, so Dev, a paediatrician, pain nurse, pain team. I met with a psychologist from the pain team, which really helped me with that, the aspect of a big change, but also on how to learn how to pace, learn how to manage that. One of the biggest ones is the complete cliff edge of service at 16. So you get to the age of 16 and paediatrics say, yeah, you're now an adult, we'll discharge you. We'll send you to adult services, and adult services won't pick you up till you're 18 because you're not an adult till you're 18. So you have 2 years of complete blank from services. And then, for example, with like physio, they want to get rid of you from 14, and adults won't see you till you're 18. So there's a whole period where you don't have the services, or you don't have that ability to go in and see people. Again, I'd say another real struggle I have with is like wheelchair services. It's a very slow service that doesn't quite give you what you need. It's quite a difficult one to try and cope with, especially with things like physio, where it's obviously the more you do physio, the more you continue, the more you build up strength. So having that gap of service is quite detrimental, but it's also it's a very different world, adults to children. You know, across anywhere, social care, like hospitals, it's all the way it works is very different, and it feels completely different. How it interacts is very different, and there's none of that like preparing you for it. And they're dropping you off at probably the most critical period in your life, in the point of view of they're dropping you off at the end of just around when you're going to do your GCSE exams. Obviously depends on when you're born, but around that time. And there's no service for when you start your A-levels or your level 3 qualifications. So at that most critical period where you probably need the most support, and you put yourself under the most like stress or pressure, you have that support completely disappears. biggest thing is especially when you're in school, when you have an EHCP, the big issue is there's no link together. Obviously, it's called an educational healthcare plan, but education do their part, health do their part, and care do their part. And there's very little link together. I remember at all my meetings, the health team couldn't leave the hospital, education couldn't leave school, so they couldn't ever meet up. I'd say the same because I can walk, I always like taking the school bus to school. And school buses don't legally have to be wheelchair accessible. So to deal with that, to get the wheelchair to school, they used to pay a taxi to drive the wheelchair from my house to the school and back again every day. So I could still use the school bus like everyone else. It got to the point where in a term they'd spent the same amount in taxi fees as it would be to buy a new wheelchair to have one at school.
We are developing stronger and stronger working relationships with the local authorities at a strategic level, and so are getting much better at planning how we deliver change and improvement together. What our families would say, though, is that they're not feeling the impact of that joined-upness yet, and that we need to get better at doing that. So what we've been moving towards across Devon County Council and Plymouth and Torbay is some of the more practical solutions that we need to put in place. So, for instance, how are we supporting children while they're waiting for diagnoses? How can we think about children's needs being articulated as needs rather than as diagnosis, so that the diagnosis doesn't become a blocker for putting some of that support in place?
I'd probably say the biggest thing is to listen to people, listen to service users. They're experts in their own experience. They know what makes a difference to their lives. And if you use the service user and their expertise in their life and use medical professionals with their medical expertise, then you've got a perfect match. They know a lot more than people give them credit for.
Well, can I just say, Lachlan, if you're watching this, from all of us, thank you so much for sharing your story. And I'm really sorry to hear about some of the difficulties you've experienced with services. And we all wish you the very best for your future career. But I know that Nigel Aitchison, our Chief Medical Officer, is very keen to respond first to the many issues that have been raised in your piece. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Lachlan. Absolutely remarkable young man you are, and the way that you were able to articulate for some of the issues that you've faced, which are things that we need to and are planning to build on, I thought was incredibly powerful. So thank you. When I saw the video, it reminded me of why I joined an ICB, because you represent, I think, because you've been able to negotiate, your kind of life to the point where you're going to contribute back as an occupational therapist. You've managed to show the four purposes where we're trying to improve both people's health and the healthcare they're able to access for everybody across Devon, where we're trying to really focus and address inequalities, and that's of access, experience and outcomes. We're desperately trying to improve our productivity and efficiency, and we've heard in this board meeting already the work that our Chief Finance Officer, Chief Delivery Officer in particular have been working on in a number of different areas. But I think that your perspective is really important to us because it hints to some of the other opportunities that we have as an ICB. And of course, you as both an individual in what you're planning to do are already increasing both the social and economic contribution that we collectively, I think, can add to our systems. So what I would say is, and Hannah hinted to this, what we're really trying to do is build that collaborative relationship right across system partners, and that's not just statutory partners, but also voluntary sector organisations and with and for individuals, because again, I think that's a key part of this, how we support people like you to become resilient, both as individuals and within your community. And you highlight some really really important areas where that hasn't worked well. Our approach that we're taking in the reorganisation of our children and young people services in particular is to bring together both the physical and mental health elements of children and young people, and that's something that Penny, as Chief Nursing Officer, and her team, our team, and others across the system have been building. Is it perfect yet? No, it isn't. But it is, as Hannah said, a move towards trying to base what we do on people's needs rather than having to wait necessarily for a diagnosis. And the good news, and it is good news for Devon, is that we do have expertise, experience and emerging evidence of an approach that's based on a whole system, whole person, place-based approach to supporting people from both a statutory and voluntary sector approach. And I think it builds upon something also that that Judy mentioned in terms of population health management. In other words, what we know about the population and the needs that our population has. And we've got that information now. As colleagues will know, we are in the Southwest and Marmot region, and more than that, in that Marmot region in the Southwest, we've got the two most deprived areas in Plymouth and Torbay within that region. And so using that knowledge, that information, that opportunity is something that we're building into our much more holistic approach, I think is what I'm trying to say, to how we approach these services. And for some of the specifics that Lachlan mentioned in terms of the different ages at which young people transition from what were potentially paediatric or young people services into adult services, our approach is one where in this bringing together of all of these agendas, transition is a specific area of focus for us so that people don't face that cliff edge that we heard about, and that we've got a much more needs-based, person-based approach to making sure that all of the services align. And we're doing that through, we've already tried this for real in something called Creative Solutions, which again is an approach that colleagues in Plymouth have got huge expertise in and are sharing with us across Devon. In our population health and inequalities team, we're lucky enough to have expertise in a team member who is part of that working. So is it perfect yet? No, it isn't. I think it's a piece of work that's evolving, and one that I think is a very exciting one that I know Penny and the team are looking forward to picking up and taking over with Hannah, as you heard on the video, involved, and our colleagues in public health and local authority. It's a pity that Donna and colleagues from local authority aren't represented, because their support with this approach is hugely valued and part of the solution, I think, to the issues that Lachlan raised for us.
Thank you for setting out many of those general points, but can I just return to that very specific point about the huge gap for physiotherapy access between the ages of 14 and 18? Can you assure me that we're actually going to address that? Because that's a huge gap.
What I took from Lachlan's story was the importance of the multi-agency working, as demonstrated by the education, health and care plans, but also to make sure that we don't lose focus on our health responsibilities. And it will come up as part of the paper that I'm about to present. But I'm really keen that we mainstream children and young people's performance and oversight of performance into our wider ICB arrangements with real rigour, so that will be addressed and that will be picked up. Yeah.
Thank you. And I'm just wondering whether we could add that as a specific follow-up action that we hear when that has happened. That would be really helpful. And of course, there were the wider points on wheelchair access, and that budgets sit in different places. It can't be right. So thank you for that. Right. So Penny, I know you wanted to make some further points in response to were there any other points you wanted to make? Shall I go to questions from...
questions, I think.
Yeah. Thank you very much. So Hisham Khalil was waiting next. Hisham, thank you. Sorry, Hisham, you're on mute. We can't hear you.
Thank you, Chair, and I'm assured, first of all, to thank Lachlan for the eloquent way he highlighted the issues, and also to Nigel and Penny for giving assurance on what's in place. as a practicing clinician, I see a lot of transition gaps between pediatric and adult services, from pediatrics to adults, even in hospitals, where children, when they're at that transition age where they have their operations. We see this in speech and language therapy. We see it in physiotherapy, as highlighted here. We see it a lot in mental health as well. So I'm just suggesting that till the structural actions are in place to make sure that this transition is smooth without gaps, that there is for every health service a member of staff who oversees this transition and who ensures that children who are transitioning into adult age do not have gaps in their care, which could be quite serious. So just an interim solution till those actions are put in place, and they can take time.
Thank you. Liz, and then, so Liz Davenport next. Thank you.
I did put my hand down. I think my point in part was picked up by Nigel, because if we start with, so what matters to me, we would have a very different conversation with Lachlan, who described very, very articulately the challenges I think that we could recognise in services. But we started with that and then thought about how we bring services around children, young people, and support them in transition. We wouldn't have got it quite as badly wrong as he was describing to us today.
Thank you. I'm going to come next to Judy and then to Frank. So Judy Harkerton.
Thank you very much. And again, thank you to Lachlan. Very, very helpful. I've always known there's a cliff edge, but it used to be on your 18th birthday from paediatrics to adult. I do think this is a commissioning failure. Somebody has commissioned services that stop at 14, other services that stop at 16, and others that don't start till 18. I don't really want a witch hunt, but I do think we should very quickly find out where those decisions are made, and and change them. And it's a really important issue for us as more commissioning is delegated to provider collaboratives, that, again, we are operating as an ICB, managing those interfaces. So it cannot be that one service decides it stops a certain thing at one age. I have no idea where the decision came from, but it's a really important lesson for going forward. We should never have these gaps in commissioned services. We may have failure in delivery of what we commission, but actually a rule that leaves a gap like that is unacceptable. So thank you, Lachlan, for telling us.
Frank O'Kelly.
Thank you. Lachlan brilliantly articulated some of the problems. What I don't want you to think is that's in isolation. I think you all know I've got 5 adopted children. They're now aged 22 to 32. 2 of them have SEND. I've been through the system myself, and as a consequence, I have a particular interest in it. So the patients in my practice hunt me out to help with things like EHCPs, which they often don't get any medical input to at all across the system. Their health, education, health and care plans. Social services will agree to one bit. Education will agree to other. They're not coordinated. And the issues about children getting access to care are huge. And the problem is we create thresholds for access as opposed to what has been said by Liz, thinking about what the person wants or needs. And we haven't got the ability to change what we do. Saying that it'll cost the same in taxis as to buy a second wheelchair, I mean, it just makes no sense. You'll be doing that every year for the next 5 years. So we do need to be much more adaptable in the way we deliver things. And I think it comes back to what Steve said about not only as a board do we need to be thinking of ourselves as a service, we need to think of ourselves as, in terms of culture, as a service industry for the individual in front of us and what actually matters to them. What we do is we create all the systems to deliver the care, and then they run in very rigid ways that just don't work for people. And as far as children are concerned, I've got some 16-year-olds who function like 25-year-olds on my list. I've got some 25-year-olds who function like 16. I would almost take it right up to 25 and put them in the most appropriate part, especially if they've got learning difficulties. But it is a huge problem. And of course, the children can't make their voice heard in the way that a lot of adults do. And it's not just the children that are affected. His family will be affected by all the time trying to get access into services that we don't mean to create obstructions, but we do.
Thank you very much, Frank. Tandy, and Tandy Hara, and then Sheena Asthana. So Tandy.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, what I get from here is that actually poor care is expensive care. And I think that whilst we're looking at it from the NHS perspective, I think this is also a system issue, because that cliff edge that he's describing is also the same cliff edge he would face if he was on benefit, for example. If he was on disability living allowance, for example, after 16, he would need to reapply and send the forms by a particular date. If he didn't have all of that support, that means the same young person is also having difficulties with access to benefits, or benefits being cut off because he didn't return particular forms on time, as well as the issues that he's just described there. So I think that we need to look at this as also a system issue, because the 16 thing isn't just a health thing, it's also a social care issue. And I think that we'll end up with having young people with really significant difficulties across the piece in that 16 to 18 period. So I think we do need to think about it from that perspective as well.
Thank you very much. And then finally, Sheena Asthana. Thank you, Sheena.
Thanks. I think this is an absolutely brilliant film demonstrating so many problems within our system. And I think what it's showing is how siloed services with separate rules do not work for individuals in any way whatsoever. And they're really expensive and wasteful. So my question is that I'm really pleased to see, I've got two questions, really pleased to see greater strategic coordination going on at the strategic end. Does that go far enough, or do we need to start thinking outside the box in terms of creating truly integrated services where we do not have these separations between health, education and social services? We have an integrated service for this group of people. And my second question, and that I think picking up on Hisham's point in terms of having an individual who basically champions the needs of individuals and signposts them to services. You don't have to be a health person or a social care person in order to signpost to those different organisations. So I think we ought to start looking in a different way at the role of generalists, some compassionate generalists who support people through these complex journeys and make sure that these wasteful things don't happen. My second question is that whilst it's very reassuring to find out that these things are being better coordinated and these conversations are going, how are we evaluating whether that's making a difference? How are we keeping an eye on what has clearly been an absolute failure of service integration and quality?
Thank you. Well, I'm going to come to Penny to respond to that, and it may be that you're covering that within your next, the paper that we're coming to next.
In part, Chair. But I want to be really clear about the breadth and depth of the transformation that's needed around the children's agenda. And Devon is exceptional in the level of regulatory oversight that we're in. These issues are being experienced elsewhere. And I think we absolutely need to get a prioritised plan, and we will have to sequence this work over time. But there's some really important enabling principles here around internal, external focus. And although we weren't able to get local authority contribution to the clip at that stage, actually I've been working really closely with Stuart Collins from Devon County Council, for example, to look at things like joint commissioning arrangements and so forth. But I think we need to be very measured and truly take what is realistic, what is doable, because we mustn't overcommit, but we've got to move at pace.
Thank you. And Nigel would like to come into.
Yeah, thank you. So I absolutely agree with Penny, and I think that those explorations with colleagues about how we do commissioning around that needs base is really important work, and it's proceeding. But I mentioned some of the strengths and assets that we have in the system, and Sheena will know well the Plymouth Health Determinants Research Collaborative, and that's currently a partnership between Plymouth City Council, University of Plymouth, and it's funded by NIHR, and we're linked into that work, and we are beginning working with that group to build the evidence base around the all-around win from doing different things by focusing on people's needs and bringing in, as I said, both statutory and non-statutory organisations to support people. It reduces the, it focuses on the needs of individuals. So some of those gaps and some of those cliff edges that Lachlan talked about would not be present. It allows us to do the different things. So the value-based approach, which is, as you know, underpins our operating model, would say that, for example, issues like the wheelchair, often we default to the cheapest wheelchair when people apply for them. But actually, what we should be doing is we should be saying, well, we should be looking towards Lachlan as an individual and saying, well, what does he need from his wheelchair? And we heard that we didn't meet his needs, and that was expensive. If we use a value-based approach, then we would actually provide the right chair for him. And there are many stories about where that hasn't worked well, with wheelchair provision in particular. But I think the other thing is that in meeting the individual's needs better by that coming together of voluntary and statutory organisations, as somebody said, it does tend to cost less, and it actually wins for both the individual and for the teams and staff who are involved in providing that support and that care. And as I say, we are now building an evidence base. We've been doing some of this work on compassionate approaches to healthy weight. We in the ICB, and that is now being evaluated in terms of its impact. I was down in Barnbarton, a very deprived area of Plymouth, only a week or two ago, where I've seen again the evaluation of work that we're contributing to there. So we are building an evidence base, and as Sheena and Frank.
Can I just say that's an expected fire alarm? So there.
As Sheena and Frank and myself and Penny have said on many occasions, this is a complementary approach to how we need to do transformation in our system, without which I think we will continue to have conversations about pressures on emergency departments, etc. But as I say, we start from a better place than some systems with that expertise. We just now need to find a space and a place to make sure that we develop it.
Thank you, Penny.
Yeah, so final comments. So within each of the local authority footprints, there are children improvement boards. And I think the thing for us, Nigel, is how we get greater prominence and leverage in those spaces, because actually there are good programme management plans, but I would say we could offer up some more of the work around the NIHR. And as part of my paper, so I won't repeat it when I present that, but we are planning a lock-in in the same way as we had a UEC lock-in and elective lock-in. We're planning that for children and young people to really understand both the problem, really understand the problem, of which there are many, but also the assets around us, so that health really start to power up in terms of how we demonstrably power up our input into those wider improvement boards.
Thank you very much. I know, Steve, you wanted to make a final comment.
I did, yeah, thank you. And actually, just building on that, so I think as a board, we probably need to be slightly careful about coming up with our own solutions to these problems, because there are a load of interdependencies and other issues. However, what we've seen today is something that I think could summarise, we strongly want to see fixed. So I think if we can just ask Penny and the team through those improvement boards and the other work they're doing, as well as focusing on the strategic stuff, that we've got a real focus on how we fix some of these baseline issues. And when we bring back the children and young people plan, that the board will be able to see in that where this sits with all of those priorities that are pressing. I guess the more general point I wanted to make, and it was just a reflection from me listening to Lachlan's story and then the discussion, we probably as an organisation, as a board, need to give deeper thought to how do we bring the experience of people into our commissioning process. So actually we both design our commissioning approach with people around us who are at the sharp end, and they're able to form part of the feedback mechanism about whether it's really working on the ground as well. I don't know what the answer to that is yet, but I think that's something we need to consider going forward.
Right, so thank you very much again, Lachlan, and we will be following up with you. So I'm going to come now to the structure and processes supporting children and young people's services, and this is a follow-up from our really helpful seminar, and thank you very much, Penny, for leading on this item.
Thank you, Chair. So I will take the report as read. So in summary, this does follow on from the board seminar, which in part provided you with your necessary training around children in care. But it not only acts as a follow-on, it formalises that content into a board report and also provides greater clarity on some of the items. So Appendix 1, you will find the legal and regulatory context for children, including accountabilities and responsibilities, and that's a really key point of reference. I think when we started having these conversations, we were very often talking at cross purposes. It also demonstrates the multi-agency committee structure to deliver and oversee, and that talks to my previous point about how do we make those structures work, because very often the key work happens outside of those spaces. So what needs to change culturally, structurally and procedurally in those spaces? Most of those are multi-agency. And then also gives a current position around regulatory compliance and issues arising from purely a health perspective in terms of this paper. And also informs and ensures the board around remedial actions taken, high-level actions, which then obviously will have a tactical element within them. So in terms of key points, I'll go through the regulatory position first. So obviously we heard in the board seminar about the seminal update, well, the key update of the Working Together to Safeguard Children, which happened in December 23. And you'll see within that there is a requirement now on chief executives from each of the partnership organisations to hold a lead safeguarding partnership. We've been instrumental in driving that forward with chief exec, local authority chief execs, and the inaugural meeting is on the 13th of June. Important for board noting. In terms of the position, however, you may remember from the board seminar that Donna Manson talked about the Devon Safeguarding Partnership. And actually, that is in level 4 oversight by the Department of Education, so 4 being worse. And that was the position as of February. And there are 5 key points for change there, part of which is learning from things such as rapid reviews and so forth. But a key point was the lack of continuity by partners in that space. I've been prioritising attendance at that meeting, and we've now moved to a level 3, so that's an improving position, but one that we need to prioritise going forward. And you may also remember Donna talking about Devon County Council being in commission. So they're in commission from the Department of Education, and there is potential for them to enter into a trust because of children's services. So us actively being part of the solution is absolutely key. And they've got an upcoming ILACS inspection, which is to do with the multi-agency safeguarding hub. And it was really good to see that we had an approval through our investment group to provide additional health resource into that space. Under safeguarding, we've got the joint targeted area inspection, and that's subject to a standalone paper, so I won't discuss it further here. But you'll see there are a number of key actions arising relating to safeguarding. I'll now turn to children in care. So we are part of the corporate parent arrangements, and you'll see the statutes which define that under 4.1. There was a key issue around our failure as a system, I would say, to deliver health assessments, both an initial and review, within the statutory timescales. We are reliant on referral of consent within those 28-day working days, and we now have a high priority improvement plan with each of the local authorities with tight trajectories. So that will be subject to the same oversight and rigour as we would with any of our other performance metrics. You'll see also in 4.2 that the number of children in care, those have come down slightly for Devon, and what we do need to be cited though for children in care are those people that are just below that threshold. So that is the absolute pinnacle of children vulnerability, but there's much broader vulnerability, and I think that talks, Nigel, very much to how we use population health data to inform this work. So then moving on again to SEND. So again, hearing Lachlan really illustrated many of the issues that we find in the SEND agenda. Now, the Department of Education called an exceptional meeting, including myself and Steve, regarding the absolute requirement for us to improve this position. So we have a long list. It's spoken about every time we have board through the IQPR, but the growing list for diagnosis around neurodisability or divergence. And we have to make a step change. And we do talk eloquently, actually. We go on tour talking eloquently about how we could do it differently. So needs-based, much more joint working, mental health practitioners more prominent within the education setting. But we do really need to transform our approach to the waiting list management as well. And to that end, there are some key enablers around all three of those key priority areas. Number one is around really getting a teams of teams approach to leadership for children and young people. So Bill is supporting the lock-in, so to speak, but I'd call it a summit, but something exceptional to really focus on children and young people through the PMO. Anthony, you're going to, although I'm the SRO, you're going to be there, and not to muddle up the SRO, but to show our joint leadership across the ICB around how we weave children and young people firmly into the main infrastructure of our oversight and delivery and commissioning arrangements. It's really important that we understand the accountability framework for children. The breadth of meetings that you need to get to that quite rightly are established because of our high level of regulatory oversight, that actually servicing all the meetings meaningfully and then actually doing the work between is a key consideration. So it's important we work with local authority partners to identify who key members of those committees are and that they are suitably trained, informed and have decision-making powers. And I'll be working with Steve to land that. And then, of course, we need to make sure that we've got a board-approved resource plan for children and young people, and that will be a subject to a further board paper. And then really making sure that we weave children into workforce, for example. It's often the main constraint, Piers, isn't it, cited. And, of course, there are restrictions because it trips off the tongue. We say we will transform the workforce. And then we've got the Royal College of Paediatricians saying you can't have a different workforce than a paediatrician to do the IHAs. And I know I'm being detailed, but it's really pushing into some of these constraints. And then actually making sure that we're in a data-informed position, so we've got true insight, and we are developing that data dashboard. It's constrained a little, Liz, by the issues around IT within Children Family Health Devon, but we really need to press into that space. But the recommendations are there, but I'll conclude and take questions.
Thank you. Frank, I can see you'd like to come in first.
2 points, one good and one possibly not so good. The diagram on page 226, Appendix 2, about the structures you have to actually link into in 3 different authorities, I think that must create risk, and I don't see how you can possibly furnish that. So the first thing is, can we somehow rationalise that? Because I think that's a massive problem. I'm the safeguarding lead for our practice. The amount of safeguarding stuff is going up and up and up, and it is becoming a real challenge. I cannot imagine what it's like to try and furnish it for the whole of Devon. So that's the first thing. The other is a good comment. The local authority with health are working on family hubs across Devon, which I found out about a week ago. Now, previously, when I've referred a few years ago, we used to have structures we could refer to, like Sure Start and health visitors and other things, and you would get help straight away. Now, when you refer in as a GP, what you get told, and this is me working with the local school as well, that patient's for early help. Now, for me, at that point, early help was a bit like the Emperor's new clothes. It's carry on doing a bit more yourself. Whereas these family hubs now are going to come into existence. There's a whole plan. It's Action for Children are involved. And each of the sort of market towns will have a hub. Now, the difference is it will link in with all the services that might support children in that area, including the voluntary sector and things. So when things come and go like Sure Start, it won't just suddenly disappear and there'll be nothing. So, I think that is a really positive thing going forward. And it might take a year for that to be rolled out, but that will be very different for a market town like Tiverton, where you actually want to... And these things change around the provider all the time. So I don't know half the time what's out there. But if there's a family hub that comes into existence, it will be really good for those families and those children. And it will work from 0 to 19, for ordinary children, and 0 to 25 for SEND. So that is a really positive development.
Thank you for that. I've got Piers, Sheena, Judy and Kevin would all like to come in.
Yeah.
Can I just remind colleagues that we are running significantly behind, so we do need to be crisp if possible.
I should be prompt. I was just going to congratulate Penny, actually. I think she's done some brilliant work in this space. You can see, I think we can probably all see the progress that you've made in a very short period of time, so well done, I have to say. And to offer you my support with the resource, a paper that you're going to have to prepare, both internally and, more broadly from a strategic workforce point of view. You'll have my complete support on that. So,
thank you. Sheena.
I also want to really thank Penny and her team. I think this is brilliant work. I completely understand that we're focusing on our sort of mandatory regulatory responsibilities, and that you're looking at a particular group of people. So I'm aware of that. However, one is aware that we're looking at the absolute tip of the iceberg of need. And it just sort of slightly worries me that we know we've got loads of challenges at that tip of the iceberg. And what's happening beneath? What are we able to do beneath in terms of shifting towards primary prevention rather than reacting to problems that are already presenting themselves? Is kind of slightly concerning me, because I don't think we've got the resources. I don't think we've probably even got the bandwidth to look at this. And if we don't, we're going to continue to have these problems. So I absolutely agree with Frank that the family hub issue is really, really great. I'm just slightly worried that as a system, we're retreating into our kind of statutory responsibilities and seeing this very much as what we do in a health point of view, rather than, actually taking it right back to what can we do in terms of parenting support, what can we do in terms of education. And I take on board the comment that was made previously about, well, we mustn't as a system push this on other people, but what does that mean? We're supposed to be a system. So I don't understand why, as a system, we're not working out creative solutions. Well, you are, and I'm really pleased that you're doing that. But I'm just worried that sometimes as an ICB, we see primary prevention as the job of the local authority, whereas actually it's our role as well. So it's just a sort of, thanks for the amazing work, but a real concern about what we're not doing down there.
Thank you. Penny, I know you want to respond to that.
Yes, so I think we shouldn't confuse the scope of the paper with the scope of the work. And it was really important to make sure that we got clarity around our statutory and regulatory obligations, because sometimes we've been talking at cross purposes. And I know I shouldn't put too much emphasis on this lock-in, but what I'm expecting everybody to come into that room with is an offer. So, I will be obviously inviting our Director of Population Health. I'll be inviting partners into that space. And as we mainstream children, it will be I'm hoping, Anthony, it will be part of elective oversight. So I think it's an and, but for the purpose of this paper, it was important to make sure we had a really clear understanding and a way forward.
Thank you. And now I've got Judy and Kevin both would like to come in.
Again, I echo people's comments. It's great you're leading on this. Just a couple of comments about issues in your enablers. We've had this message about data and information to the board when we were a CCG that we can't get provider information on children's services. Some aspects of children's services, they must be doing it operationally, and we just need maybe the business intelligence team to get really into why we're not getting that detailed. But I'm just saying it's been going on for ages, it's not recent. Likewise, on workforce, we repeatedly get told it's difficult to recruit certain posts, it gets better, and then they leave. And so we really need some rethinking of the workforce model. And if that means taking on the Royal College of Paediatricians, then we should. And lastly, I do think there are some really big issues about how we use resources between us, the money. Donna has always said, it's actually not the money, it's the way we're doing things. And there was an interesting piece recently on the level of profit made out of certain companies, made out by certain companies on the placement of children in care. Massive expense, I don't know if you saw it. But there are resources going into places which may not be the best place if we can change it. No need to answer.
Penny, can I ask though, would it be helpful to actually write a letter formally to the Royal College of Paediatricians to ask if they could engage with us? Not at this point.
Because it's paused because of the election.
Of course, yes.
And we are expecting some change in primary legislation afterwards. But we are going to have to push into these spaces, so at a suitable time it may be helpful.
Thank you. And then finally, Kevin.
Thanks, and I'll echo again the thanks for the amazing work that's been undertaken at pace on this. So my question is a simple one. Just given the tone of urgency that we've had around this issue in the meeting today, do we have a timescale for identifying the essential resources and that paper coming back to the board?
So Steve and I have already discussed this, and we are expecting it to come. I mean, I'm working on it to come back to the next board meeting.
Actually, I can see that Liz was also wanting to come in.
I'll be very brief, aware of time. So I think when we think about workforce issues, and I think the workforce model is important, but I think our learning from CFHD is if we're delivering an integrated model that delivers good outcomes for patients, you attract staff. So I think some of the work that that Penny is really well articulating in her paper and her conversation today, I think if we can get the model right, then I think it will also enable us to attract high caliber people into the system. It does, you know, from a provider perspective, the resourcing issue is a critical one, alongside some decisions around where we think we need to prioritise our resource currently, because I think that's what we are really needing going forward from a provider perspective.
Thank you for that. So just to bring this item to a close, I'd just like to put on record that we are agreeing that we're going to hold ourselves to account for ensuring that NHS Devon enacts the legal and regulatory obligations for children and young people, and that we're going to receive a further paper that identifies the essential resources to address the health system responsibility. So thank you very much, colleagues. Penny, I know that there was a separate paper on the JTI, the Joint Targeted Area Inspection, and we're being asked to note and endorse the plan. So do you want to just quickly make any comments on that, because we'll take the paper as read?
Yeah, take the paper as read, and that we submitted the written statement of action on time. We still wait feedback from the regulator, but it was an example of really good multi-agency working in bringing the plan together. Thank you, Chair.
I think the paper speaks for itself. So if colleagues are happy, I'm not proposing to take any questions unless there's any burning points people want to make, but to seek, as I say, that we're noting and endorsing. Thank you very much. So we're now going to come on to the next part of our agenda, which is around governance, performance and assurance reports. And first of those is the Integrated Quality Performance and Finance Report, which Anthony was going to lead on. Thank you, Anthony.
Thank you very much, Chair. I do take the report as read, as conscious of time. There are a few things that I just want to highlight, though, and they've become more apparent as we've gone through some of the discussions. today. We've covered elective care and we've covered UEC, but actually in the context of this report and its timing, bearing in mind it's already gone through quality and performance, it's already gone through the finance committee, actually, and the reliance on numbers and the narrative surrounding those numbers actually probably, I don't think, serve us particularly well. So with permission, we're going to be working on what that looks like in terms of trend analysis going forward, because there is a disparity with the numbers in the reports as we read through the board pack. And I think the great example of that is actually around our 104-week waiters, which in some documents is referred to an end-of-year position of 4, and it then goes to 11, and actually the reality was it was 3. So there is a bit of a mismatch in timing, which I think we can correct by greater emphasis on trend analysis, and that I think will probably be more a valuable contribution in terms of this document. There are a few things that I just wanted to raise. One was around actually continued performance against cancer standards. We don't spend enough time talking about it, but actually I think it's a good indicator of both system working and individual provider working in terms of those pathways. Of concern, though, is around primary and community care, and particularly the target of 85% of appointments being made within 2 weeks. And obviously that wasn't achieved in any locality for this period, and that is of concern. I think there is obviously a dynamic tension with same-day access to services, but actually we have seen a slipping away from that performance, and working with the team to get a very clear improvement plan in place in the context of everything else that's going on in primary care at the moment as well. On more positive news, though, in terms of no criteria to reside, I'm pleased to say that actually the overall position for Devon was 10% in this reporting period, and actually when you see the next report it will be in single figures, and that's a testament to the system working with our local authority partners. Our aspiration, though, is to go much further than that, and that we are pushing for a 6.4, 6.5% achievement in terms of our UEC recovery plans and the enabling elements within that. And I think we've got a fighting chance of being able to deliver that with some new ways of dealing with some of our complex patients and actually expediting their discharges going forward. The last bit really then is around mental health, and although there's generally achievements against a remit of indicators here, there is an element that is not being picked up, and that's around the time people are waiting for assessment and for beds, and we need to come back with a clearer plan in terms of mitigation for that. It is a source of sort of continued and increasing frustration for patients waiting in ED, but also waiting in the community as well. So we are working with our mental health collaborative partners and our mental health providers to come up with a clear and coherent plan for addressing what is a national issue, but actually very much a Devon focus in terms of improvement for us going forward. Otherwise, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, and I'm very conscious that this has been through 2 committees as well. So if there are any points that haven't been covered or anything that the committee chairs would like to raise on that, yes, thank you very much, Graham Clark.
Thank you very much indeed for it. Can I just make one point, though, which is the key recommendation and actions says, and I quote, "The board is asked to take assurance from the current performance position against KPIs." I don't think we can do that, frankly. We can note it, and we'll recognise a lot of work, good progress, actually. I think, Steve, you made the reference to green shoots. I think I can see green shoots here, which is great to see. The SPCs will confirm that in due course. I don't think we can take assurance at this point.
And no, and in fact, I have amended it to say that we are noting the current performance position rather than taking assurance at this point. So thank you for that feedback in advance. Any other comments that... Yes, thank you very much. Frank O'Kelly.
I didn't mention this at the QPEC, but there's so much detail in here. We sometimes don't pick out things that have changed, and you really do have to look at it very, very carefully. On page 287, 3,000 children have moved from the acute list to the community list without any obvious reason or explanation for it. And also in the children's page 291, we suddenly start reporting on autism as 600 people on the waiting list, but that's only Plymouth. whereas last month it was 4,500, which was the whole of Devon. So when people change this, it is quite easy to miss some of the stuff in there. And I suppose that comes back to the other point, is what we really need in some of this is just a list of the changes and explanations for what's happened, because otherwise we're just monitoring the system month on month. And you know, if there's a huge change like that from the month before, we absolutely need to highlight it and explained.
I can certainly come back on the latter point, which was a data issue in terms of our provider. So we weren't able to report a full system position, hence the difference between the 4,000 and the 400, which is a Plymouth-only position at this point in time. I'm assured that we will have the data by next month, and actually that will show a lesser position, but it won't be 400 for the whole system.
And Steve.
Yeah, just to say on that, I think we probably shouldn't expect board members to try and spot the differences. So there's probably a bit of reflection we need to do overall to highlight not just the trends, but things like data issues that may confound some of that analysis up front at the beginning of the paper so people can see it. And it's probably fair to say, although we'll need to think about our capacity to do this in the short term, we could probably do with another look at our whole integrated performance reporting process and the report that comes. In the end, what it needs to give board members is a real sense of where the issues are, whether they're good or bad, but it's just be able to see the wood for the trees. It's an art that in 30 years in the NHS we've never quite got right because of the number of our indicators that we're required to look at, but it's probably something we can do better at. So it might be over the summer we have a discussion with board members who may be really interested in this work about how we might open up and think differently about how we report performance here in a way that's helpful and get some clarity for people, particularly given the complexity of everything that we're trying to do.
Thank you very much. So duly noting the current performance position, and now we're going to move on to the board assurance framework, and Philippa Harding is going to lead on this item. Thank you, Philippa.
Thank you. So this is the first time we present the new approach to the BAF to the board. The new approach is a greater alignment to the NHS oversight framework. I think it's fair to say that this is a first iteration of a document that will live and develop and grow over time, not least because a lot of the information that we needed in order to populate the activities that we're doing to mitigate the risks that are flagged is what will come out of the work that we're undertaking on the annual report, the annual plan. So I think I won't go into the detail of the content of the report, but to flag that this is something that we'll continue to work through, particularly with board assurance committees as well. And I think the key issue that we've already had highlighted through initial board committee consideration is the need to look at the quality of care, access and outcomes risk and make sure that we're getting a performance perspective as well as a quality perspective on that. So I'll be working with the chairs of the quality and the finance and performance committees to make sure that we've got an appropriate approach to that.
Thank you. Does anyone have any follow-up points for Philippa? Yes, Graham Clark.
Sorry. Yes. The first time we've seen this, of course, so I fully accept it's going to need revision. The risk appetite is an interesting one because that should be guiding our views about the actions that we take or don't take. They're new, and for example, I just wonder whether prevention, ill health, and reducing inequalities is that right? I'm not going to ask for an answer now, but I think we should re-examine those risk tolerances if they're going to mean anything.
Thank you. Happy to keep them under review. These were the ones that were agreed by the board at the last iteration. But obviously, as we get the content into the BAF and it becomes real, there is every opportunity for it to change. One of the actions that we've taken away as an executive is to make sure that we actually look at the risks in detail every month to make sure that we're not just looking at the BAF, but the actual management of those risks. And if we see that there's an issue where we feel that the tolerance level needs to be amended, then absolutely that would come out of that conversation.
Thank you. Steve.
Yeah, and I'm also looking forward to a discussion maybe over the summer about how we do some of this governance stuff. For me, tolerance is a prompt for the board to take action or ensure that action is taken when something is above our tolerance because it's gone beyond our ability to want to tolerate it. Appetite is subtly different, and if we get that right, what it should do is guide our organisation when they're thinking about how they're going to respond to the challenges that we face, that they know the kind of guide rails that the board has put in place so we don't have wasted effort essentially around designing things that would be beyond our desire to want to countenance. So they're both really important but slightly different, and I think over the summer we'll need to have a bit of time to think about the interplay of those two things and how we can communicate out to our organisation so that governance becomes not just fun but also a way of helping the organisation to work as efficiently as it possibly can.
Thank you. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Thank you very much. Great. Is just to approve the latest iteration of the 24-25 BAF risks. Anyone taking an opposite view? No. Great. Thank you very much, Philippa. Right. And now we're going to come to the section of our meeting which is around working with partners, and this is the Cornwall and Isles of Scilly ICB update. I'm very grateful to Molly Marcoux for joining us from Cornwall and Isles of Scilly, and I've heard in advance, Molly, that you don't want to speak and that you'd like this to be taken as read. Is that correct?
Thank you, Chair. I was just recognising the time factor and offered to take questions to progress the meeting.
Thank you very much, Molly. Does anyone have any questions for Molly? No. Well, thank you, Molly, and we really appreciate you coming along to listen to what's happening at our board. So thank you. So we're going to note that as an action, and then we're going to come to the One Devon Integrated Care Partnership update. And at this point, I'd just like to note and put on record my special thanks to Councillor James McInnes. He has now been elected the leader of Devon County Council, and so I'd like to pass all of our congratulations to James, but sadly their gain is our loss because it means that he's been really diligent in attending this board in his role also as chair of the Integrated Care Partnership, and so I'd like to thank James for taking on that role. He was the very first chair of the partnership. He's been an absolutely fantastic chair, and anyone working with James will appreciate his personal style, warmth, and his vast experience that he has brought to the role. So thank you very much, James. We're going to be very sadly missed, and we have already started the process of discussing who should take over as the chair of the Integrated Care Partnership. My personal view is that this should not be an NHS chair. It should be from one other part of the partnership, because I think that helps to broaden the experience. But I will update the board whilst we're waiting for that person to be imposed. As the deputy chair, I'll be stepping in to James's shoes, and I hope to update the board shortly. So thank you very much again, James. So we're just noting his report, unless anyone has any specific points they'd like me to cover in his absence. No, thank you very much. So then we come to the committee chairs' reports, and starting off with Kevin Orford and the Finance and Performance Committee from the 11th of April and 9th of May.
Sorry, thank you. Yes, so as you say, Chair, there's two reports from the Finance and Performance Committee, the 11th of April and the 9th of May. I'll take them as read, but just flag up those points to the board in the 9th of May meeting, which relate to the operational plan and the outstanding work, which we'll be following up at the next Finance and Performance Committee in a couple of weeks' time.
Thank you. Judy has a question. Thank you, Judy.
It's more a question going forward, Kevin, linking back to the discussion we had earlier about the different committees, and an awful lot of the decision-making committees in our new structure will report to Finance and Governance. So I'm looking here, I'm on page 346 of 426, And it said the committee noted that 23-24 funds would be retained within NHS Devon, with funds being dispersed with the assistance of the intensive support team and at the discretion of the System Recovery Board. So I just wanted to ask that this committee, going forward, and I'm not on the committee, although I wouldn't mind being on the committee as the world goes forward, is that the detailed discussion takes place in other fora and is then just presented in summary, and the quizzing of the breadth of that decision-making falls to the Assurance Committee going forward. So it wasn't a quizzing you now, it was just to say this highlights the point I was trying to make earlier.
Yeah, thanks, Judy. That's really helpful, and yeah, I'm on the same page as you on that, and happy for you to join the committee if that's what we decide to do.
Thank you very much. All in violent agreement. That's great. I'm going to come next to the Quality and Patient Experience Committee. And again, there are two committees for Tandy to report back on, the 11th of April and the 9th of May. Thank you very much, Tandy.
Thank you. Yeah, I also take the reports as read, and quite a few of what's in these reports has been discussed elsewhere. So I'll just focus on a couple of things that we discussed. In April, in particular, we looked at the Section 29 that was given to UHP regarding quality. We were assured that they have taken the remedial plan of action, and that plan of action will be presented to their board in May. So we're quite confident that the response to that Section 29A at UHP is going on. The second one is to do with DPT. Again, we received this Section 31 by CQC. This was regarding additional support unit and to do with people with learning disabilities and autism. There were some concerns around restrictive practice there. Again, we're also assured that that trust has taken the right approach in terms of providing CQC with all the evidence in response to that, and that people are safe and well there. And then the other couple of things is just the things to bring to your attention. First one being that we did recommend that we should have a board development session around quality and equality impact assessment. There was also a note around the closing of coroner services in Plymouth, and that means that those services have gone to Exeter. We weren't very clear at that point about what the impact of this is, but we are assured that the impact of that will be reported back to the board, and we'll take that further. And then the other issue was around workforce issues and impact. Again, that's an issue that the committee will look at moving forward. So that's the only things I want to bring up to your attention. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Tandy? Nope. Thank you very much, Tandy. And then we're coming to the Primary Care Commissioning Transition Committee from the 18th of April. And thank you, Judy Hargaden, for leading on this.
Thank you. Just one point I'd like to emphasise. We've been doing work as a whole system on the primary-secondary care interface, and a piece of work was completed recently that all the boards have signed up to, and it was Alex Deegan in Nigel's team who fully brought it to a close. People like John Finn and other colleagues, and colleagues in the acute trusts, we are doing it first. This is an incredibly important device for enabling a good dialogue between primary and secondary care, both of whom perceive the other side to be making problems for them. So I just wanted assurance, I suppose, that it's going to be used in our commissioning discussions, our financial discussions, our professional leadership discussions. These documents are only as any good as they are used. I know all the trust boards have signed up to it, and the medical directors are due to be leading on it. So I just wanted to highlight that as an important tool for us all to use on managing these interfaces.
Thank you very much, Judy. Any questions for Judy on that specific point or anything else within her report? No? Thank you very much. And then finally, we come to the Audit and Risk Committee from the 22nd of April. And thank you very much, Graham Clark, as Chair of the committee.
Thank you. Actually, we also had a meeting on Monday, so the paper isn't here, of course, but I will just touch upon it. I think it's perhaps helpful. So starting on the 22nd of April meeting, we looked at the annual report and accounts, so be submitted as a draft, which we did. It will be coming back both to the committee and to the board on the 27th of June. Meantime, KPMG are undertaking their audit work, which we believe to be on track. That's the external work. The internal audit programme has been behind, and that's why we actually needed the additional meeting this week to clear the backlog. There was a recognition that the number of audits to be completed to finalise the opinion was behind. It is now nearly caught up. The value adds are outstanding. But that does confirm that the opinion is going to be limited. There is a rationale around it. It's an improvement on the previous year, but still just in the limited end of the spectrum. That's partly to do with the resultant conclusions around the internal audit programme, as well as the timeliness of some of those things, because it takes a year view of it. Interestingly, KPMG, when they do their value for money audit, look at the year end, and actually is a more positive view, interestingly. There were two things that came out of the 22nd just for noting. I don't think they need discussion itself. One to note is that we looked at the environmental policy and the date of that being generated, and that led to the recognition that the resources that we've had thus far have been limited, and that we've entered into an agreement with UHP to support the environmental strategy. So just be aware that that's happened. And then the second one, with Penny sitting next to me, is we were falling a bit behind on following up on the recommendations on the continuing healthcare audit, and also struggling to agree the terms of reference for a audit on learning disabilities. And I think Penny and I have had a very productive conversation about taking that forward, recognising there have been pressures in that directorate, and I think bringing in an interim deputy is going to massively help. So I'm just flagging the fact that we looked at that and taken that forward. In terms of the meeting this week, there was a raft of internal audit reports. There are three I wanted to just highlight. Well, they'll obviously be reported more fully on the next meeting, because they came out with, in part, limited assurance. The first one that I think, Bill, you had a very helpful input on around the what was called financial management audit, came out as limited. It was, we decided, not specific to the ICB, it was almost a system-wide issue around reconciling what providers were providing, particularly around forecasts rather than actuals, versus the numbers that we were reporting, and clearly you wanted only one view of the truth, not multiple ones. So the audit had picked up the fact that some known providers and our forecasts of savings weren't the same numbers, so there was an urgent action to close that. There were some other actions as well, less material. There were also a limited report on the workforce, and particularly this follows the workforce plan, where there was regarded as perhaps being inadequate provision to the delivery of that plan. And Piers, again, I think there was a very helpful paper that went alongside it that highlights how you're now aligning resources. And in fact, in the IPQR report, there is a section where that is reiterated in terms of how you're redeploying resources to deliver that. And the third one, which I have already picked up with Judy, but I know we'll need to take further forward, is there was a report on our requirement to provide an annual self-declaration on primary care and pod services. Those, you will recall, when delegated to us, were left in terms of the management of a hub shared across the southwest region. But the audit has concluded that for whatever reason, we as an ICB have not been engaged enough with it, complex reasons, to provide that self-declaration at this point in time. It's a resource issue. So we do need to address those. Other than that, I think that's it. Open it for questions.
Thank you for that detailed feedback. Does anyone have any questions for Graham? No. Well, thank you very much. Graham. What I'm asking for the board to do is to just take assurance from the committee chair's reports. So please note that. Thank you. And then finally, we come to this section on finance reports and quality reports, which we've decided, because much of this has been covered elsewhere, that we will take as read and only debate if there are any exceptional questions that people want to raise. No? Yep.
Just very briefly, because obviously it's subject to the chair's report and has had prior consideration, but there is one item. So University Hospital Plymouth are actually in the National Maternity Safety Support Programme, and we will be bringing a detailed report regarding maternity through to QPEC, and will be subject to board oversight at the next meeting.
Thank you, Penny. So now, in sort of closing items for this board, we come to the action register. And what I'm suggesting is that we take as read the items that we're saying are completed. But if there's anybody who feels that there are any of those items that they don't agree are completed, could they just please just let me know? No, anything on there? No, but then we'll just run through the items that are still in progress with just an update. So we have item 37, which was for the Chief Delivery Officer to review the orthopaedic pathway and barriers. And this again arose out of a citizen story that we had. Is there anything on this that you'd like to update us on?
Certainly, yes.
verbally?
I think in terms of the longest standing action in the paper, I'm very conscious of that. I'm pleased to say actually we do now have a report to close down both this action, but more importantly to give an update on all of the recommendations and where we are against each of them that came out of an independent review we did on the back of that patient story. There's an awful lot of learning. A lot of it's been implemented as part of the NHS Devon programme in terms of elective pathways. There are still some elements, though, that are in progress. But what I would be happy to do is circulate the report and take questions from that.
I think it would be really helpful to circulate a report and also to provide feedback to those who come to our board. Absolutely. And actually talk about their story, because I think it is really, a really positive thing if we can do that and publish a letter that we are writing in response. Steve would like to come in.
Just wondering, just a bit of formality, whether we should take that final report through a committee, just so that we've got it, rather than just sharing it with board members.
Absolutely.
Yes. So.
Go through a number of different routes, to be perfectly honest, couldn't it? I think that because of the patient story, it might be good to go take through the quality element.
Yes. So if we take it to the quality and patient experience, and to Judy also saying this is a commissioning
we don't
issue.
have a commissioning committee, and this is why I keep going on. Where are the decisions made? And a commissioning committee would be. And I'm not saying we should have one. I'm just saying we used to have one, and that's where it would have gone.
Yeah. Steve, do you want to respond to that? Because I think it is to say that the commissioning gap is something I know that you come to very regularly, Judy, and I think we do need to identify where that is going to sit.
I suggest we have an offline conversation about it, just so we can see how it fits in with the overall committee structure. Yeah.
Did you want to say anything here, Philippa? No, but there are. So thank you very much, Anthony. Really appreciate the progress that's being made and look forward to hearing further. So then we come to item 59, which was the NHS lead for dentistry once appointed should liaise with local authority colleagues around the engagement with children and young people in care about how they access dental services. And I know, Nigel, you have an update for us.
Yes. So I wonder, Chair, in relation to all of those elements, as you know, I've been working very closely with the Hub over the last few months, and we now have a very comprehensive plan with detail on it for what we're going to do next over the next few months. We also have, we're in the process of recruiting our dental advisor. We've also identified an interim senior lead within the ICB while we do our restructuring process. The restructuring contains posts for the dental aspect of this, and I wonder if we were to bring a formal paper together to Judy's primary care committee that might then be the route back to this, because you want to see that anyway. I wonder if that might be a route to close this, because as you say, that work is done.
I'd be really happy to see that, and so we'll leave that one as in progress as well. And then we come to item 61, which is a report to be brought to a future meeting of the board, which provides an update on the action plan resulting from the Newhouse group work and the progress made in respect of the NHS Ethnic Minority Action Plan for nurses. And Philippa, you were going to provide an update. Thank you.
Yes, so we are working up a forward plan for board meetings in light of the annual plan conversation that we've had today, and to make sure that we reflect the committee work plans. We've tentatively programmed this for September, but we want to make sure that we have board meeting agendas that make sense as a whole. So we just need to finalise that, and we anticipate being ready to bring that back to the board at the July meeting.
And
the work plan.
Thank you. And we've agreed previously that we'll leave these items open rather than just saying that that's completed because we scheduled it. So thank you. And then we come to item 62, which is the report of the System Improvement Director in respect of progress against NOF4. And Alison Williams, do you want to make a comment on this point?
Thank you, Chair. We will bring that together with the output of the QPC meeting on the 4th of June. So hopefully by the July board that will all have been approved, and then we could bring a suite which will contain the new exit criteria, the RSP review report and the support measures for 24-25.
Thank you. And then we have item 68, which is primary care representation on the urgent and emergency care board be considered when its terms of reference were being reviewed and an update provided. So Philippa, you were leading on this.
So yes, I think we've talked about primary care representation at the meeting today. We're going to do some further work and some further thinking on that. That it's referenced in the report that was presented to the board, but we will take the comments away and work them up into the terms of reference, and again represent at the July board meeting.
Thank you. And then item 69, which was an update on the outcome of the review being undertaken by the executive team in respect of end-of-life commissioning and equitable funding for adult hospices in Devon. Nigel Aitchison was going to lead on this.
Thank you, Chair. So Steve has asked me to be the executive lead for a task and finish group which we've established to look at the whole of end-of-life care, which will include issues around the hospices and that funding piece. So it's a broader piece of work that we've commissioned. So yeah, that's commenced.
Thank you. So we'll leave that as open and look forward to hearing the update. And then finally, action 71, which was the board development session to be held in respect to the longer term strategy for primary care across Devon. Philippa, did you want to just update the board?
Yes, we're making arrangements together with Frank to have that session in August.
Thank you very much. So that is that's all of our action list. Thank you very much. I understand that we have no questions from members of the public. So can I ask if there is any other business? No? Great. And just to say that our next meeting in public will be on Thursday, the 25th of July. And also just in closing, just to thank Frank O'Kelly, who's giving us some internal feedback after the board meeting. Thank you for doing that. Right. Well, that brings us to a close. I'd like to thank all colleagues and anyone following from members of the public. So thank you very much.